Chapter 1654. There is an event at 8 p.m. on the Shuzhongqiba. You are welcome to ask questions. It is time to start spoilers. Qi Yanglong really did go to the Demoyai post house, personally urging the young king to leave the capital with his troops. However, as soon as the elder got off the carriage, the post house officer ran up to him with a small cloth bag in his hands. Because he didn't dare confirm the elder's identity, he carefully asked, "May I ask if elder is from the secretariat?" The post house officer didn't directly ask if it was the head of the secretariat, instead bringing up the yamen instead of his official position. Even if he made a mistake, he could still make up for it. The elder nodded and made an N sound. He asked, "Could it be that the king of Biyao has already left the capital?" The post house officer's knees went weak. Fortunately, the elder had already grabbed the cloth bag and weighed it in his hand. He said in confusion, "Seal?" The post house officer, who had almost knelt on the ground, forcibly straightened his back. He didn't know what to do and his face flushed red. The Demoyai post house had always been a place of plague that ordinary officials avoided like the plague. Last year, he had also accidentally angered a manager of the department for purging officials in the Ministry of War, which was why he was thrown here to fend for himself. How could he have thought that there would be a day when he would speak face to face with the head of the secretariat? When the post house officer heard the prince say that Qi Yanglong of the secretariat would be coming to Demoyai this morning, he didn't take it seriously. He felt that at most, a third or fourth rank official would be enough for his ancestors to come. The post house officer gritted his teeth. He didn't have the time to worry about being rude. His mind was filled with the thought that every extra word he said to Grand Secretary Qi would add a bit more glory to his family. He asked in a trembling voice, "Head of the secretariat, do you want to enter the post house to rest for a bit?" Qi Yanglong smiled. Just as he was about to tactfully refuse, he suddenly thought of something and asked, "Does Demoyai have green ant wine this time?" The post house officer said like a chicken pecking at rice, "Yes, yes, yes." When the post house officer led the head of the secretariat into the inner courtyard of the post house, he purposely made the many minor officials of the post house busy. Qi Yanglong didn't expose his shallow intentions, allowing the post house officer to lead the way into that secluded small courtyard. The post house officer quickly brought out a rattan chair for the old man and explained that Wang Yi liked to rest on the rattan chair whenever he had nothing to do. He had heard from the previous post house officer that Wang Yi did the same when he came to the capital last time. He had a special liking for this rattan chair. Qi Yanglong lay on the rattan chair and looked like he was resting with his eyes closed. The post house officer took 2 pots of wine from his subordinate and did not dare to disturb him. He stood under the eaves with his back bent and waited quietly. Qi Yanglong rested for about half an hour. After opening his eyes, he asked softly, "What did the young prince say when he gave you the item?" The post house officer slapped his head and quickly said, "I almost forgot. His Highness had indeed warned me that if the head of the Hall of Secretaries graced us with his presence, I should tell him that this little plaything was temporarily lent to him by a scholar surnamed Zhang. Now, it is returning it to the scholars of the world. If it weren't for the head of the secretariat, since Milord has personally dismounted, then there is no need to say anything." Qi Yanglong was taken aback. A scholar with the surname Zhang? Green eyes? Definitely not. Zhang Julu would definitely not have any personal relationship with Biyao. Even if he did leave behind this relic, it should have been given to Huanwen. Oh, then it should be the saint of the Zhang family, Yansheng Gong. Qi Yanglong slowly stood up and put away the small cloth bag. He took the 2 pots of green ant wine from the post house officer and asked with a smile, "Have you drunk this wine?" The post house officer blushed with shame and said, "I only drank a few mouthfuls yesterday. It's a bit hard to swallow. It's too strong, like it's burning my throat." The post house officer paused and flattered, "Head of the Hall of Secretaries, even if you want to drink, you should drink it slowly." Qi Yanglong dismissed it with a smile and took the wine and left. Give silver? The old man did not have this thought. If he really gave silver, how would this unknown official dare to brag to his colleagues about his title as head of the Hall of Secretaries? How would he be able to use this title to seek a future with a clear conscience? Great Peace City, Great Peace City. It was a very peaceful city, but there were not many people who were truly at ease here. In today's court assembly, the young king who came to the door but turned back finally did not appear again. This greatly disappointed the Rouge army that was even more powerful than yesterday. The Assistant Minister of Rights, Jean Lanting, had not attended the morning court assembly for 2 consecutive days. He had asked for leave from the old Minister of Rights, Sima Puwa. He did not even go to the court assembly for the next few days. He closed the door and refused to see any guests. It was said that he did not even receive people like Gao Tingshu and Wu Tsongxian. After the Assistant Minister of Personnel, Wen Tai, and Anong General, Ma Zhongxian, became the Jianghu County Administrator and Deputy Regional Governor respectively, the head of the Peng family quickly took over as the left Assistant Minister of Personnel. The Imperial Army's high-ranking general, Li Chang'an, replaced Ma Zhongxian as the new Anong General. Just as the morning court assembly in the capital was bustling with activity, 800 light cavalry under the careful escort of the Jingji West camp were already on their way to Jidong's border. Everyone in the Jingji West cavalry saw that there wasn't going to be any trouble and felt a sense of relief. It was said that it was easier to invite the devil than to send it away. This northwest vassal king and his 800 white horses were truly difficult to invite and send away. It was said that the northern general, Ma Lulang, had been scared to death. One of his troops had also suffered a great calamity the day before yesterday. The blood stains on the street outside the Imperial Astronomer's Gate had not been wiped off yet. The private army that the Minister of War, Wu Zhongshuan, brought to the Jingji South camp had also suffered a great loss for no reason. The cause seemed to be a conflict with the young king at the Ministry of War's Yamen. A valiant general from the southern border was beaten half to death on the spot. The Anxi general, Zhao Gui, who was born in a noble family, seemed to be seriously ill. It was difficult for him to even get out of bed, let alone wear armor and ride a horse. Therefore, only Qi Changgong, the captain of the Western Cavalry, was left as the backbone of the Western Cavalry. After about 100 miles from the Jingji West camp, several of the Bailiang cavalry turned their horses around and stopped. When the Western Cavalry, who only dared to follow far behind the 800 Bailiang cavalry, saw this, Yuqi Changgong personally rode out and took the lead to approach. When he saw the figure of the king of Bailiang, he was immediately on tenterhooks and slowly moved forward. Su Fengmian, who was dressed in simple casual clothes with a white jade belt around his waist, lightly squeezed his horse's belly and came to Yuqi Changgong's side alone. After a moment of silence, he looked at the scene of the Liyang cavalry galloping forward and said, "Captain Yuqi, I apologize for troubling you when I went to the capital earlier." Yuqi Changgong was stunned, and his heart tightened. What? Was he going to use peaceful means before resorting to force? For a moment, this Hu cavalry captain didn't dare to speak. He was afraid that if he angered this arrogant and despotic demon of the Su family, he would implicate his 2 camps of cavalry. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "If we go further west, I estimate that we will soon be greeted by the Ji province soldiers. You can escort us here." Yuqi Changgong braced himself and said, "Your Highness, it's not that this general is unwilling to accept your kindness, but there are orders from above that the Jingji West camp must escort your Highness to the border of Ji province." Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Is it Wu Zhongshuan or Tang Taizhuang?" Yuqi Changgong's expression was awkward. At this moment, a lone rider galloped over from the northeast. Su Fengnian sighed and slowly moved forward to meet this uninvited guest. The 2 riders faced each other 20-some paces apart. The man in front of Su Fengnian was slightly older than him. He did not have the playboy air of Anxi General Zhao Gui, nor did he have the martial aura of Yuqi Changgong. If he had not appeared here, he would be an ordinary scholar on the streets of Great Peace City. The man raised his butt and rubbed it a few times. His voice was hoarse as he said, "I didn't dare to believe that it was really you. After I returned to the capital, I heard that a young swordsman had appeared in Great Peace City who had challenged Qi Jiajie. His name was Wen Hua, but I didn't believe it either. Then, was it really that fellow I saw back then?" Su Fengnian nodded. "It was him. But, he no longer practices the sword." The man's expression was bitter. "Then back in Wuzhou, did you already know my identity?" Su Fengnian said helplessly, after getting drunk several times, you told Wenhua yourself that you were the grandson of the great general of this dynasty. I'm not deaf. Wenhua naturally did not believe you. Just like how he thought I was boasting at the beginning, when I returned to Mount Qingliang, I knew who you, Ma Wenho, were. The number of generals in the Liyang dynasty with the surname Jingping Town can be counted on one hand, and there is only one surnamed Ma. The man softly murmured, at that time, I couldn't afford to buy good wine. When I drank bad wine, it was easy to get drunk. What could I do? Su Fengnian looked at this scholar that he had met by chance in Wuzhou back then with a complicated expression. At that time, Wu Wenho was a scholar who traveled tens of thousands of li alone. He liked to write travel books and happened to run into him and Wenhua, who were playing chess and gambling in an alley. He lost all his money and then relied on them. After hanging out together for more than 2 months, Wenhua and Wu Wenho seemed to be particularly at odds. Both sides didn't see eye to eye and would always get angry and glare at each other over trivial matters. Wenhua never believed that this stingy and poor scholar came from a famous family, while Wu Wenho didn't believe that this ranger with a wooden sword could really make a name for himself in this life. However, at that time, Wu Wenho, who was away from home, didn't want to use his family's connections in the local area. He had always been shy of money. In addition, he was resentful that his master was a national chess player in Liyang. He couldn't win a single game of chess against the person surnamed Su. He stubbornly tangled with these two scoundrels for almost 3 months. Later, he had to cross Jiangnan and travel to the southern border. Only then did they finally part ways. Wu Wenho looked at Su Fengnian and asked bluntly, if you don't know me, Wu Wenho, when you enter the capital this time, will you pay a visit to the manor of the great general of the north? Will you send punitive forces to denounce me? Su Fengnian nodded and said, of course. Wu Wenho's expression was pained. Su Fengnian said indifferently, in any case, the grudges of the older generation are right there. If you feel guilty toward your grandfather Ma Lulang and feel that the old debt hasn't been settled and that it is now my Su family that owes your Ma family, you can always ask me, Su Fengnian, to pay it back. Since you are the eldest legitimate grandson of the Ma family, I won't find it strange. Ma Wenho suddenly roared, could it be that you, the king of Biyao, think I will act as if nothing happened? Chapter 1655. Su Fengnian patted the Biyao blade at his waist. His body leaned back slightly, his face full of sarcasm. When you and I were poor, you, Ma Wenho, won a game of chess against me? Now, I, Su Fengnian, am one of the 4 grandmasters, and the king of Biyao with 300,000 cavalry under my command. You want to wrestle with me? I reckon that even an assistant minister of one of the 6 ministries does not have the face to be arrogant with me. You, Ma Wenho, if you have the ability, you should be the head of the Secretariat or the Minxia province. Only then can you barely have the qualifications to be my opponent. Just like Bai Yan and my father, Su Shao. Speaking of which, Ma Wenho, do you need me, Su Fengnian, to wait for you for a few years, or a few decades? Ma Wenho's eyes were red. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, what, you are not convinced? 1,000 heavy cavalry of the Ma family is only a so-so. You are just a scholar, do you want to humiliate yourself? Su Fengnian turned his horse around, raised his hand and waved. This action was clearly full of sarcasm. Ma Wenho shouted, Su Fengnian, you are a bastard. Just you wait. Su Fengnian did not pay any attention to him, and left. In the distance, Wuxia Chronicles, who had seen the unpleasant meeting between the two, heard these words. The Hu cavalry officer was even more worried for the eldest grandson of the Ma family. If the king of Biyao wants to kill you, then he will kill you for nothing. The 2,000 cavalry under my command will at most help you collect your corpse. This vassal king had caused such a huge commotion in Great Peace City, but no one came out to uphold justice. Now that he had left the capital, the eldest grandson of the Ma family who had just lost his stabilizing force was nothing in front of him. Wuxia Chronicles hesitated for a brief moment, but in the end, he gave up the idea of escorting Liang Qi into Ji County. With the eldest son of Ma family stirring up trouble, he, the commander of Hu cavalry, was really afraid that the king of Biyao would use him as a punching bag to vent his anger. In the process of Wuxia Chronicles running to get close to the young master of the Ma family, he just happened to pass by the young lord. The latter smiled and cupped his fist to bid farewell. Wuxia Chronicles, who was flattered, hurriedly returned the greeting. After returning to the group, Jia Jejia sat on his horse and looked at Su Fengnian with a puzzled expression. Su Fengnian picked up the mink hat from her head and put it on his own head. He laughed softly and said, "Only I am allowed to be Su Zhao's son, and Ma Wenho is not allowed to be Ma Lulang's grandson?" There was no such logic in this world. As long as a person is alive, having something to think about is definitely better than not having anything to think about. Su Fengnian glanced at the lifted curtain of the carriage and saw half of the beautiful face. He joked, "That's enough. You don't have to hide anymore. Even if you, Chinyu, get out of the carriage and ride away, no one will stop you." The white horse, or to be exact, the commander of the Phoenix Battalion, Yuan Meng, rode his horse over. This burly man, who had followed His Royal Highness to travel Jianghu, laughed and said, "Your Highness, that group of capital cavalry is really cowardly. They are so boring." Su Fengnian glared at him and said, "Don't be so sarcastic here. Do you think you are a hero just because you are a traitor?" Yuan Meng's face was filled with hidden bitterness. "Your Highness, I am reluctant to give up my position as the commander of the Phoenix Battalion. If your Highness allows me to join the battle at the border as a commander, I will go straight to Huda City." Su Fengnian said grumpily, "Right now, the Yuzhou cavalry lacks a general. Are you willing to give up your position as the commander of the Phoenix Battalion and become a fourth-rank cavalry general?" Yuan Meng smiled mischievously and said, "Damn it. I am not stupid. I will not do it. I will not do it even if you beat me to death. Even the cavalry generals in Yuzhou can't compare to the captains of our Liangzhou border army. Only a fool would go and lose face." Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Commander Yuan, your words are quite firm. All right, when we pass by Yuzhou, this king will definitely have a good talk with Yan Wenluan, Qin Yinshui, Yu Wandao, and the others. It will also let the Yuzhou side know that Liangzhou has a hero like you, Yuan Meng." Yuan Meng smiled apologetically and said, "Your Highness, it doesn't matter to Commander Yan and Deputy Commander Qin. After all, they are only the head of the infantry and can't control my official status. However, please don't say this to General Yu. If he becomes the deputy commander of our Baliang cavalry in the future, what will I do?" Su Fengnian laughed and scolded, "Get out of here." Yuan Meng left with his tail between his legs. Next, Qin Yu indeed left the carriage. However, her horsemanship was mediocre. Afraid that she would delay the march, she rode on the same horse as Su Ying, who wore a red robe and a hat. Su Fengnian and Miss Hehe rode side by side with them. Qin Yu asked curiously, "May I ask who that son of an aristocratic family is?" Su Fengnian sighed and said, "He is a friend I met during my earliest travels. At that time, apart from the two of them, this guy was the one I hit it off with the most. Of course, I had good karma with him, but I had bad karma with Xinyuan Qingfeng on the Great Snow Plateau. Actually, during those 3 years, I met a lot of people and a lot of things, but most of them were passed with a smile. For example, I once met a female hero who hadn't become famous yet. I think her surname was Qi, and she had a good temper. Her martial arts skills were ordinary, but her chest was really big. Every time she competed with others, she would be restrained because she felt embarrassed. She was the only female hero I met in those 3 years who didn't speak ill of us. It's a pity that there's no news about her in Liang Lake. Maybe she's married. That guy just now also fell for a fairy's skirt. As a result, there was one time when that fairy in white fought with another fairy. At that time, in our eyes, their fight was full of fairy aura. However, the fairy in his eyes had her underarm clothes cut by her opponent's long sword during the fight. After that, there was no more after that. Qin Yu was confused. Why is that? Su Fengnian narrowed his eyes and looked into the distance with a smile. Because we all saw that fairy's underarm hair. Qin Yu was dumbfounded and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Actually, there are a lot of interesting things. For example, there was a guy who went to a martial arts competition to find a spouse. The only time he won was because his opponent suddenly had a stomachache during the competition. Then, he had a rare moment of glory, so he chased after his opponent and beat him up. He grabbed his opponent's belt and refused to let go. In the end, you can probably imagine the scene, it was unbearable to look at." Another example, there was a young and handsome hero who was very admirable when he saw injustice on the road. He was also born with a dignified appearance, but the moment he opened his mouth to speak, he was done for. His speech was a complete mess, and no one knew where he came from. It was really a pity. It can be seen that it's really not easy to be a young hero who is loved by everyone outside the martial arts world, right? Qin Yu was speechless. Su Fengnian saw a horse appear on a hillside in the distance. He laughed and spurred the horse forward. Jia Jia and Su Ying also followed. Qin Yu looked at the back of the figure in front of her. She suddenly understood the change in the young man's state of mind. Jianghu was a place where it was difficult for people to die if they didn't want to. On the battlefield, people wanted to live but might not be able to. There was no difference between the two, but there was a difference of life and death. This man named Su Fengnian might not be purely into the Jianghu in green robes with swords. He might not really dislike the battlefield, right? Su Fengnian seemed to have guessed Qin Yu's thoughts. He suddenly turned his head and said with a smile, "The battlefield is actually the most magnificent Jianghu. Really, one day, I will have a good fight there. 10,000 enemies are 10,000 enemies. If in Jianghu, where can you find 10,000 people to be your green leaves?" Qin Yu finally had a good impression of him, but it suddenly disappeared. Su Fengnian turned his head and saw the horse. He shouted with a smile, "Aunt." Then, in the distance behind the armored woman, two people suddenly appeared on horseback. Wu Qingxing groom was holding a little girl in a green robe. Su Fengnian reined in his horse and stopped beside Aunt Xiao Yute. Yu groom rode closer and said with a smile, "If your highness doesn't mind, let me go with you." Su Fengnian frowned and said, "Lu Huang is not in Biyao." Yu groom gently rubbed the little girl's head and said calmly, "It has nothing to do with Shidi. I just want to take a look outside the Northwest Pass." Chapter 1656. Su Fengnian was silent for a moment and then smiled. "It's good to take a look now. At this time, the Beimang barbarians still haven't caught their breath and the border is still peaceful. In the future, we might not be able to comfortably watch the desert wind." Yu groom got straight to the point. "No matter. If there really is a war, as long as Biyao needs me, I can join the army." Su Fengnian asked curiously, "You don't want to avenge your master? Are you not afraid that your apprentice brothers and sisters will hold a grudge?" Yu groom said calmly, "They are two different things. Besides, we are not that narrow-minded. Speaking of which, when did my master, Wang Xianji, fall to the point where he needs his disappointing apprentices to avenge him?" Su Fengnian smiled. "That's true, that battle." Yu groom's face was bitter as he hurriedly waved his hand. "What happened in that battle is between you and my master. Winning or losing, life or death is also between the two of you, but if you say anything more, I'm afraid I won't be able to resist. Even if I know I will lose, I will still fight you. At that time, I will be embarrassed. I don't have the face to go to Biyao, but if I don't go to Biyao, this girl will make things difficult for me." Su Fengnian nodded. Zhao Yute looked gratifyingly at Su Fengnian. To be able to make a proud martial artist like Yu groom healed, it was not just because of the title of King of Biyao, or even because of the 300,000 cavalry. When they went up the slope, there were 3, and when they went down the slope, there were 5. Su Fengnian suddenly asked Yu groom, "I heard that you are more focused on practicing the sword than Lu Huang?" Yu groom nodded. Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment before asking, "Then have you ever thought of a question? Back then, when you were competing with others, your sword chi was unstoppable, and your spirit was boundless, and then the spectators clapped and cheered, 'Good sword, good sword.' Don't you feel awkward? It's a bit of a killjoy?" Yu groom was confused. What's awkward about it? If you feel bored, you can just ignore it. Moreover, if I were to spar with someone, it would most likely be a life and death battle. Naturally, I wouldn't care about what others think. Su Fengnian curled his lips and muttered, what kind of young swordsman is he if he becomes stupid from practicing the sword? Groom Yu smiled and asked, what do you mean? Su Fengnian smiled and was about to speak when Qin Yu interrupted, Mr. Yu, I advise you not to listen to his explanation. As expected, bridegroom Yu turned his head and put on an aloof posture as if he wanted to hang the topic up high and leave it hanging. Su Fengnian could only settle for the next best thing. He turned his head to face his mother's sword attendant. Unexpectedly, this aunt also smiled and shook her head. I don't want to hear it either. The young vassal king who ran into a wall everywhere felt a little depressed. Su Fengnian, who was bored to death, hummed a little song. It was a song that he had learned from a certain someone in the streets. Don't say that I'm so poor that my sleeves carry the wind. Let's not talk about the fact that I have no place to sleep when I am tired. The world is my bed. Let's not talk about the fact that I have no good wine when I am thirsty. The great river is the wine pot, there is no one as lucky as me in the world, no one as lucky as me. The green-robed child listened to the song and felt it was very funny. But when she looked around, why was no one laughing? In the winter of the second year of Jianghu, after the vassal king who had caused a ruckus in Jing had left the capital and reached Beiliang's territory, it was said that the princess Sui Zhu Zhaofengye had died of an illness. This grievous news that was neither too big nor too small was quickly forgotten by everyone in the great news that was sent back to Great Peace City. Under the personal leadership of Gu Jiantang, the king of Jiaodong Zhao Sui, the crown prince Zhao Yi, and the king of Liao Zhao Xiong, the three royal relatives, worked together to assist Gu Jiantang. With the Duo Yan elite cavalry and the Blackwater cavalry as the main force, a total of 160,000 cavalry, they went north to conquer the desert. This became the first great victory after Yong Hui's numerous failed expeditions in the beginning of Liyang. They beheaded 80,000 Beimang barbarians. General Wang Sui, who had previously stayed in Beimang's western capital, quickly rushed to the front lines. Only then did they stop the collapse of the eastern front. He gave power to the two young generals, Qiu and Dong, and once again pushed the border forward to the old border between the two dynasties. The right assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, who was originally only patrolling the border on behalf of the heavens, led 10,000 light cavalry and advanced 1,000 Li Ji Zhou General Yuan Tingshan, Deputy General Han Fang, and Yang Huchen sent out all of their elite troops to work with Gu Jiantang, who was responsible for restraining the main force of Beimang. They fought fiercely against the two flanks of Beimang, Shiwei, and Wang Jingchong for half a day. If not for Liao King Zhao Xiong's greed for merit and the defeat of Zhong Tan, who had been demoted to the eastern front as generals, the two Liao cavalry troops from Liang would have been able to enter the hinterland of Beimang. After Guangling Road's West Chu achieved a short-lived victory, the weakness of their scattered forces started to show. On the eastern front, Ko Jianghui could not hold the fort alone. Although he had defeated Song Li and vassal King Zhao Yi's counterattacks several times, the western front, under the reckless attacks of Wu Zhongshuan's 100,000 Nanjiang troops and numerous Central Plains troops, the defensive line was in danger. As the commander of the southern expedition, Lu Xingxiang, who was supposed to be in the middle of the command, also left his post and advanced prematurely. However, compared to Liao King Zhao Yi, he was much luckier. He was able to successfully rush to the back of the eastern front and settle the battle there. At the same time, Shu King Chen Jibao's 10,000 Shu soldiers mysteriously appeared in the north of the eastern front. They appeared near a portion of West Chu's reinforcements to the western front and finally defeated the young West Chu soldier Saint Xie. West Chu had no choice but to retreat on all fronts. Apart from Chao Changqing's navy that temporarily held the advantage, all of West Chu's previous achievements were returned to Liyang. During this time, there were rumors that the king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, was about to marry a woman from the Lu family as Beiliang's official consort. Liyang was mostly speculating about which generals and officials would appear in the northern Liang prince's manor during the festivities on Mount Qingliang this time. The Liyang court naturally hoped to know clearly which people were the true trusted aides of the new Prince Liang. What was even more important was that of the new generation of Biyao nobles who had the qualifications to enter Qingliang Mountain. Were there more who were hostile towards the Liang Zhao family, or were there more who maintained a neutral stance? As for when the young king passed through Jizhou and entered Hezhou, Deputy General Han Fang and Yang Huchen led their troops to demonstrate. This became a story that the people of Jingdou loved to talk about. In comparison, King of Han Zhao Xiong, Administrator Han Lin, and Jadushi Kai Nan were silent. It was inevitable that people would criticize them. After the great general passed away, the Qingliang Mountain Prince's mansion, which didn't even have red couplets, finally had a celebratory atmosphere that hadn't been seen in a long time. Although they didn't hang up large red lanterns with great fanfare, the servants and maids in the mansion all smiled when they saw people. The head of the Lu family, Lu Dongjiang, who had become more and more distant from Qingliang Mountain, also took the initiative to visit the palace. He drank a lot with Song Dongming and Biyao. The group of Lu family members who had been sick in Liangzhou finally had their tails up again. When they met people, each of them held their heads high and their chests puffed out. And Wang Linquan, who had transformed from the richest man in Qingzhou to the god of wealth of Bailiang, who had been personally managing the increasingly busy business in Liuzhou, suddenly began to live in seclusion. Lu Qingyan was not dragged down by the Lu family and her relatives. In the end, she became the official consort of Bailiang, and not Wang Chudong, whose family had made great contributions to Bailiang. This was indeed something that surprised the entire Bailiang society. In the night, at the peak of Qingliang Mountain, below the White Crane Tower, Su Fengnian, Lu Qingyan, and Wang Chudong sat on a stone bench. Su Fengnian was using a leaf to play the Ballad of the Spring Goddess. Wang Chudong had placed a book on the stone table and was resting his head on it. Lu Qingyan sat beside him and her. Behind the three of them, Jia Jiejia and Suing were flying up and down the White Crane Tower. Halfway up the mountain, by the tide-listening lake, Zhao Yute and Su Weisheng were holding hands and talking about intimate things between women. On the platform of the tide-listening pavilion, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang stood side by side. The two young strategists who were beginning to become famous all over the world didn't speak. As the night deepened, the crowd dispersed. Su Fengnian came alone to a simple, uninhabited hut. There seemed to be a delicate and weak girl standing there. She said to him fiercely, "I want to learn the sword from Li Chungang and stab you to death." Chapter 1657. When he was young, he thought that a village with more than 100 families was very big and that there were mountains and rivers. Later, when he was young, he went to the town and saw the market. Only then did he realize that the village was small. Later, he went to the county town with a wooden sword. Only then did he realize that a town with bridges and restaurants was not that big. Later, he saw famous mountains and rivers, met many people and many things. Only then did he realize how big the world was. But for some reason, in the end, he only wanted to go home. Then, he quietly left Jianghu from the biggest city in the world. He went all the way south and returned home. Because he was afraid of causing trouble for his brother and sister-in-law, the village was small. It seemed like adding a pair of chopsticks to a table was not an easy task. It meant that his brother had to plant more rice seedlings and burn more charcoal every year. His sister-in-law also had to do a lot of needlework, pick more mulberry leaves, and raise more silkworms. Moreover, his nephew also went to a private school. He also thought that as his uncle, he could at least earn some money to buy some paper and pen for his child. Therefore, the young man with a broken arm and a limp took advantage of his youth and strength to settle down in that small town. Perhaps fortune favors fools, he became a waiter in a small restaurant. Later, he even found a wife who could be considered outstanding in 100 miles radius. There was a flower in the town called the cow dung flower. It really grew the most luxuriant in the cow dung by the roadside. When he was wandering outside in his early years, when he heard people say that the flower was inserted in the cow dung for the first time, he could not help laughing. Now that he thought about it, he was even happier. It turned out that he was that pile of cow dung. That was pretty good. At the beginning of autumn this year, he finally successfully abducted his wife. It was not that there were no twists and turns on the father-in-law and mother-in-law's side, but they could not endure his wife's persistence and probably could not endure his shamelessness. They did not fight back when he was hit or scolded. In any case, he was shameless. Anyway, he was shameless. The two elders pinched their noses and nodded. His wife's two brothers actually looked down on him. There were a few times when they blocked him in an alley when he was helping the restaurant to pick up vegetables, fruits, and fish. They did not really hit him, but they did not cower. Of course, he did not have stage fright. Although he did not make a name for himself in the outside world, after all, he had seen the world. From the beginning to the end, he clung to his stance and did not relax. He only smiled at them. After a few times, the two brothers-in-law were tormented until they lost their temper. Although they did not look good on the day of their sister's wedding, in the end, they did not stop him. They just treated him as a married woman spilled water. Otherwise, how could they really beat this guy until his nose was black and his face was swollen? Although their sister had a gentle personality and had always been amenable to discussion, sometimes when she was stubborn, she was even more unyielding than a young and vigorous man. They really could not change her mind. During the Mid-Autumn Festival this year, she wanted to go back to the village to spend it with her brother and sister-in-law. This was in accordance with the rules. However, he wanted to go to her mother's house to celebrate the reunion festival this year. He had already told his brother and sister-in-law that at most, they could spend the Mid-Autumn Festival together next year. They also agreed with him and felt that she had been wronged by marrying into the Wen family. She still wanted to say something, but he waved his arm heroically and said, "You have to listen to me, the head of the family, on this matter." The corners of her mouth curled up as she smiled and nodded. However, when the young couple brought a box of mooncakes to the door, they were stopped by his brother-in-law. He said that his sister could enter the family, but he could forget about it if his surname was Wen. As he spoke, the boorish man became angry. He took the box of mooncakes that the waiter had spent 2 taels of silver to buy and fiercely smashed it against the wall of the alley opposite the door, telling the man with the surname Wen to quickly scram. His wife was angry at that time and did not say a word to her brother. She grabbed her husband's arm and turned to leave. However, he stood there and was unwilling to leave. He smiled and said that his wife must go home to see her parents today. Otherwise, he would not leave. Looking at his unusually serious expression, she did not cry out loud, but her eyes turned red. He softly told her that in this world, a family was a family. It was a matter of life and there was no threshold that could not be crossed. She hummed in agreement and lowered her head to push her brother's shoulder away. She quickly walked into the courtyard. Not long after, she walked back to the main door and suddenly saw her brother squatting side by side with the box of mooncakes beside her brother's feet. When he saw his sister, the dark-skinned man seemed to blush. He stood up with the box of mooncakes, as if he wanted to say a few harsh words to not embarrass himself. After hesitating for a long time, he still could not say anything. He could only fiercely say to his brother-in-law, "If I hear that you dare to bully my sister in the future, I will break your third leg." Chapter 1658. That day, on the way home under the moonlight, they slowly stepped on the bluestone path. Occasionally, she would playfully dance with her hands behind her back and then turn around to smile at him. At that time, he only had a very simple thought, which was to earn more money so that she could live a good life as soon as possible. He didn't want such a good woman to roll her eyes with him. Then, he began to calculate how much money he had saved and when he could rent a bigger house, change it to a small courtyard, and finally change it to a big house. But as he thought about it, he couldn't help but sigh. It wasn't that he was tired, but he felt that if he wanted to live a down-to-earth life, every copper coin had to be stained with sweat. Fortunately, his legs weren't nimble, but he was diligent, willing to put in effort, willing to smile, and willing to get up early and work in the dark. After the early days when he was often treated as a joke and entertainment, the men who had a sword around the town and considered themselves as young heroes were not too willing to compete with a young waiter like him. In their words, it was meaningless to step on dog shit. Other than dirty shoes, it was useless. It was degrading to bully a waiter who couldn't make a sound after a few blows. Moreover, as he often called storytellers to the restaurant to tell stories about Jianghu, even if they often told cliched stories, the small town showed its benefits. It was better to have stories to listen to when drinking tea than no stories at all, wasn't it? Moreover, whenever other storytellers competed with each other in the small restaurant, there would always be a few new tricks. The restaurant's business was generally getting better and better. That shopkeeper, no matter how much he nagged, was actually not a bad person. Otherwise, he wouldn't have taken him in. As business gradually improved, he gave him a few more taels of silver every month. Occasionally, when the restaurant was closed, the shopkeeper would drink by himself and accidentally drink too much wine. He would even drag him, a waiter, to eat a few meat dishes with enough oil and water. When he got married, the shopkeeper even gave him a red packet of 3 taels of silver. It was considered a very generous gift in the small town. After that, he worked harder and harder. It was not an exaggeration to say that he could replace 3 waiters, but it was certainly not an exaggeration to say that he could replace 2 waiters. After this year's Mid-Autumn Festival, the shopkeeper gritted his teeth. He felt that no matter how easy the waiter was to order around, he would not be able to cope with the increasingly flourishing business. Therefore, he hired a delicate young lady from a neighboring village to be the wine seller. She was 17 or 18 years old and had good potential. It was just that her family was too poor and she appeared thin and tanned. After she started working in the restaurant, she had been stained with meat, fish, and oil several times and her figure immediately became slim. Very soon, she gained a bit of a fresh and lively appearance. As a result, the restaurant's daily income increased again. This made the shopkeeper extremely happy. Especially with his discerning eyes, he could see that the young lady was a bit interested in the young man with the surname Wen. He was both angry and amused. He thought that his daughter was really obsessed with him. Even if the waiter's temperament was not bad, he still had a family. Why did she blindly bump into him like a moth bumping into a lamp? In the future, it would not be difficult to find a young man of equal social status. Could it be that she would have to become the Wen man's concubine? That was a blessing that only those rich old men in town could enjoy. However, what was even more interesting was that the young man with the surname Wen was usually quite smart. If it were any other ordinary man, it would be reasonable for him to touch the little girl's hand or pinch her waist when she took the initiative to throw herself into his arms. It was a small matter after all, it did not cost him a single cent. But the man surnamed Wen was still not enlightened. He was even more serious than the few scholars in the town who had achieved scholarly honors. This made the shopkeeper, who was watching the fun with a smile on his face, anxious for him. It was going to be winter soon. The rich old men were probably counting their fingers and waiting for the day of snow. They had prepared enough charcoal at home and were eagerly waiting to wear those mink furs bought from the county town. But it was much more difficult for the poor. It was cold when it snowed and even colder when the snow melted. Buying new clothes and thick boots cost money. Using charcoal to light the stove also burned money. It was said that in the north, especially after the Guangling River that divided the Liang dynasty into the north and the south, many people died. The war was very fierce. Hundreds of thousands of soldiers from the imperial court were fighting there. There were even some well-informed town officials who came from the county town, saying that in the south, there was a great general under the command of a great lord. He led an army of 100,000 from the southernmost side to the Guangling River and killed until blood flowed like a river. It was said that the dead almost blocked the entire river. They also vaguely heard that the place called Biyao in the northwest of Liang suffered even more. The army of 1 million Baimang barbarians had arrived at their doorstep. Some of the older people in the town could not help sighing when talking about these important imperial matters. Many of the younger people were heartless and would talk back to the old people from time to time. Most of them thought that the war was not a big deal and that if they joined the army, they might be destined to be a general. When they came back from the battlefield, they would lead hundreds of armored soldiers and sit high on their horses. That was what they called awe-inspiring. It had already been 4 or 5 days since the storyteller showed up in the restaurant. Not only were the regular customers unable to hold themselves back, some of the more impatient ones even stepped on the bench and cursed. Even the innkeeper was so anxious that he grabbed the waiter surnamed One and gave him a good scolding. The waiter smiled and explained that the storyteller had gone to the county town to learn from the old storyteller. Now, not only were there old storytellers in the few larger restaurants in town, even young and beautiful women were playing the pipa to liven things up. If they wanted to attract more business, they had to show some of their real skills. The innkeeper rolled his eyes. That was the logic, but you should at least let that old man come back and show us a few things. If you drag on any longer, the regular customers of the restaurant will all run away. The innkeeper finally patted the waiter's shoulder. Probably because he found his conscience, he glared at the waiter and said, "In the future, if you let that old freeloader go on a long trip, don't secretly pay for it. The restaurant will pay for it." Without waiting for the waiter to flatter him, the innkeeper had already turned around and left with a hand on his chest. He muttered that his heart ached. "You can't be a good person. You can't be a good person." The waiter, who was crippled at a young age, looked at the side street and grinned. That day, the old storyteller who had been fixed in this restaurant all year round finally came back. Moreover, word spread like wildfire, and the restaurant was full on that day. Especially when the old man talked about one thing with joy, the entire restaurant roared with laughter. Even the innkeeper and the waitress were overjoyed. Everyone looked at the waiter surnamed One. Some of the rough men even held their stomachs and laughed so hard that they almost cried. The storyteller who had rushed back from the county town said that the number one expert in the world was no longer Wang Xianji of the martial emperor's city of the Eastern Sea, but a young vassal king, the king of Biyao, who had 300,000 Biyao cavalry. This number one expert in the world and Beimang's military god, a guy called Tuoba Bodhisattva, had a fierce fight in the western regions. The two top immortals in the world fought for thousands of miles. It was a fight that turned the sky and the earth upside down, and the sun and the moon lost their light. Among them, Li Yang's king of Biyao had once beaten the most powerful guy of the Beimang dynasty out of the city with a single sword strike. If it wasn't thousands of steps, it should have been at least hundreds of steps. The city walls were like paper. Then, that young vassal king who had ascended to the top of the Jianghu personally said that he had learned that sword strike from a swordsman from the central plains called Wenhua. Therefore, amidst the laughter, there were nosy people who kept shouting at the top of their lungs, "Hey, hey, hey, One, when did you get close to the king of Biyao? Otherwise, when will you take us to the northwest to see the power of the Biyao cavalry?" Yes, 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 that's a prince. He should have a prince's mansion, right? Waiter, we'll take advantage of you. How about you take us to Biyao tomorrow? It shouldn't be difficult to eat and drink well, right? Flying sword. Give me a flying sword. Waiter One, since you can make that great prince admire you, you must have the flying sword skills from the romance novels. Why don't I break a stool leg for you, and you can take me flying? The lame young man who was standing in the restaurant's lobby was holding a jug of wine. For a moment, he forgot to pour wine for the guests. He didn't say anything and didn't answer, but he couldn't stop laughing. However, he really laughed until tears came to his eyes. At this moment, a guest who had finally realized that he hadn't received any wine after waiting for a long time slammed the table and roared, "One, where's the wine? Do you really think you're the swordsman from the Central Plains that the prince talked about? Damn you!" The waiter suddenly lowered his head and lifted his crippled shoulder. He carelessly wiped away the tears on his face and laughed loudly. "Ah, sir, here's the wine." Chapter 1659. Su Fengnian stopped at Mount Qingliang for a short rest. Then, he led the light cavalry of the Phoenix Battalion toward the new city that had broken ground at the beginning of the year. Traveling with him were Su Beiji, who had just left his post as the provincial governor of Lingzhou, and Chen Shiliang, whose official rank in Liuzhou had always been neither high nor low. The woman who had previously died with him, the king of Biyao, was his aunt, Zhao Yute, accompanying Su Weisheng. Chen Yu and the green-robed little girl hit it off very well and also stayed at Mount Qingliang. The two of them liked to throw copper coins of wishes at the wishing lotuses in Tidehark Lake. Jia Jejia and Su Ying, who had become playmates in Great Peace City, also began to go their separate ways, when they arrived at Biyao Palace. The girl liked to run with the two tiger kuei from the top of the mountain to the bottom of the mountain, and then from the front of the mountain to the back of the mountain. Only when she occasionally saw the woman called Lu Qingyan would she stop and laugh happily. Su Ying, on the other hand, liked to listen to the stories of Wang Chudong, a great literary figure in Liang. In short, Mount Qingliang seemed to become lively all of a sudden. In particular, Qin Yu, who had competed with a certain Nangong for the top spot in the Rouge evaluation, only a few glimpses of her arrival were enough to shock people. Every time she stopped by Tide Hark Lake for a stroll, if the Biyao subordinates of Song Dongming and Biyao noticed her with their sharp eyes, they would quickly spread the news. No matter how busy they were, they could shamelessly find some lame excuses to swarm to the railings of the small square outside the yamen to enjoy the scenery. Deputy Administrator Song turned a blind eye to this. He never made things difficult for or stopped these simple-minded young scholars. Although they had successfully thwarted Biyao's invasion to the south, the construction of the new city never stopped. It could even be said that they worked day and night. The construction of the outer main wall rose up at a shocking speed that could be seen with the naked eye. This kind of spectacular scene inevitably required Biyao to exhaust countless financial and material resources as a huge price. Thus, many scholars who went to Mount Qing cited classics and classics. They used the previous dynasty's capital of Dechu as examples. They all rested with the people for 30 days and did not delay the people's farming. Thus, they criticized Biyao's actions as draining the pond to catch fish. The young and strong civil officials of Mount Qingliang, led by Biyao's deputy administrator Song Dongming, sneered at this. Thus, it triggered a debate that quickly spread throughout Biyao's scholarly circles. Then, in this large-scale written battle without gunpowder, the new city site was always in full swing. Other than Su Fengnian, who was only a general and a master craftsman in name, the two governors of the new city, the administrator Li Gongda and the master of Mo, the Liangzhou prefectural governor Wang Peifang, the 6 deputy supervisors, as well as the nearly 60,000 local garrison troops and the several 100,000 military laborers of the 3 prefectures in northern Liang Pass, nobody paid any attention to the internal affairs of the pass. They paid no attention to the debate about whether or not the construction of the new city was a waste of manpower and wealth. Su Fengnian, Su Beiji, and Chen Shiliang rode side by side. Behind them were the happily chatting Su Yanbing and Groom Yu. Chen Shiliang, compared to when he first entered Mount Qing, was a fair and delicate scholar from Jiangnan. His hands holding the reins were full of calluses, and he had become a charcoal skinny villager. However, his eyes were bright, steady, and determined. At this time, he said to Su Fengnian, as long as Mount Qingliang can take out the silver, Liuzhou can immediately move 40,000 young and strong men to the new city. However, I hope that other than not owing them wages, you can also recognize their titles. Our Liuzhou people are suffering too much. Su Fengnian was in a difficult position. The silver, Su Beiji, who had been signaled with his eyes, rolled his eyes. Now, he was officially the transport envoy of Biyao. He slowly said, after defeating the Biyao barbarians, other than the soldiers' salaries and pensions, the military reward that was given out was close to 900,000 taels of silver. This was after Yan Wenluan, Yu Wandao, and the other border generals took the lead and asked not to accept any rewards. In the end, Mount Qingliang converted things like silk and stationery into silver and sent them out. Otherwise, the silver in Biyao Palace's treasury would have been completely depleted. We can still squeeze out an extra 1,000,000 taels of silver from Lingzhou, but the matter of purchasing provisions has to be placed first. After all, the imperial court has yet to lift the ban on transporting grain, so it's not good for us to have too much hope. While the Lianghuai and Jinggan roads have finally relented with great difficulty, as long as the officials of Lingzhou have the means, they're all using public silver to buy provisions. Unless it's absolutely necessary, we can't touch Lingzhou's money. Chen Shiliang did not fly into a rage out of humiliation, but he did not give up either. He asked, if we don't want wages, would it be possible for the people of Liuzhou to exchange a year of labor for the title of Biyao's official Liangzhou household register? Su Beiji thought for a while before shaking his head. Normally, it would be possible, but the war has just ended. Of the first batch of youths from Liuzhou who entered the remote cool border pass, only the 20,000 refugees who participated in the defense of Xiaoguang City and the slaughter at the Calabash Pass were given official household registers. Even the refugees outside the Liangzhou Pass who did not enter the battlefield have not received this treatment. If they could become Liangzhou citizens just by participating in the construction of the city, there would definitely be people who would be dissatisfied. Don't worry about scarcity, but worry about uneven distribution. This has always been the case. Chen Shiliang suddenly felt a surge of anger, but it was not directed at Su Beiji and Su Fengnian. He gazed at the distant yellow sands of the great desert, his lips tightly pursed. He thought of the battle to the death in Azure City. At the final juncture, just how many youths from Liuzhou had rushed over and charged into the battlefield, casually picking up the weapons of the Beiliang cavalry and the Beimang barbarians? Just like that, they had died in battle. Su Fengnian softly asked, Chen Shiliang, have you ever thought about the day when the population of Liuzhou, which has less than 300,000 people, will all be citizens of Beiliang's Liuzhou household register? There will be no need for them to risk their lives to obtain the citizenship of a different province. Chen Shiliang took a deep breath and said nothing. His eyes were absent-minded, as if he was looking forward to the arrival of that day. Many times, even the provincial governor of Liuzhou, Yang Guangdou, had joked that in all of Liuzhou, only Chen Shiliang, a foreigner who had only settled down for a few years, considered himself to be a citizen of Liuzhou. Su Beiji suddenly smiled and said, Your Highness, this pie of yours really doesn't cost a single copper coin. Compared to your extravagant spending in the past, you're much better at managing the household now. Su Fengnian laughed heartily. His arms were crossed over his chest, and he did not hold the reins. His body rose and fell with the bumpy ride of the horse, and his expression was rather contented. Chen Shiliang also smiled and agreed, You do have the posture of a thrifty housekeeper now. After Su Fengnian finished laughing, he turned his head and said teasingly, Shiliang, I know you don't care about being promoted, but this time, you have defended Qingsong and Liuzhou. Even if you don't take credit for it, at the very least, you can't run away from it. If you insist on not being promoted, what will your colleagues who should be happy about it do? You will be free, but they won't be free. Chen Shiliang shook his head and said, From the provincial governor's mansion and the Longxiang army to the soldiers of the 3 towns, you can reward me however you want. You don't have to worry about me. Liuzhou's officialdom is different from Liangzhou and Lingzhou. It doesn't have as many twists and turns as you imagine. Su Fengnian seemed to say casually, Provincial Governor Yang Guangdou himself knows that he won't stay in Liuzhou for too long. I also don't have the heart to let this old man stay outside the Great Wall and accompany you young officials who are in the prime of fighting. When the time comes, once the Battle of Liangmang ends and the border is settled, Liuzhou is destined to have a change of dynasty. Not only will the scholars in Beiliang be crying piteously for food, even the local officials of Beiliang from the 3 provinces will be envious. In the future, Liuzhou will be a place that must be passed through to connect Liang with the western regions, and it will also be an important transit point. Right now, the officials in Liuzhou are worthless, but in the future, they might be even richer than Lingzhou in Jiangnan. When Provincial Governor Yang leaves and returns to Liangzhou to be the deputy administrator or something, he will retire. When that time comes, you old men, in Liuzhou's officialdom and the 200,000 to 300,000 refugees will be like a group of dragons without a leader. Aren't you worried? Chen Shiliang fell into silence. Su Beiji changed the topic and said with schadenfreude, Our Beiliang's god of fortune is said to have traveled to every inch of land in Liangzhou and Liuzhou in just 2 short years. He also holds the position of the deputy administrator of the new city. This time, he suddenly caught a cold and is recuperating at home. Chapter 1660. Su Fengnian felt a headache coming on. Su Beiji said carelessly, all right, whoever started the trouble should end it. This saying doesn't make sense when it comes to family matters, so I acted on my own initiative and went to the Wang Fu of your future father-in-law. I found Wang Linquan and had a good drink. As for resentment, there's definitely resentment. Speaking of the Wang family, they died earlier than the Lu family. In the first half of their lives, they served the great general as a pawn. In the second half of their lives, they accumulated such a large family business in Qingzhou. With a wave of the Su family's hand, the entire Wang family brought boxes and carts of gold and silver into Biyao. Furthermore, the Wang family didn't ask Mount Qing Liangshan for an official position, nor did they ask Mount Qing Liangshan to open a back door. All they did was do the most difficult business. What were they after? Wasn't it all because they wanted their daughter to be the principal consort, and not the secondary consort? Su Fengnian sighed softly. No matter what, this was the right thing to do. Su Beiji continued with a smile. After Wang Linquan drank too much, he let it slip. Even if Chu Dong's daughter doesn't have the fate of being the principal consort, as long as that woman surnamed Lu is also the secondary consort, the two of them are secondary consorts without any difference in rank. Chu Dong won't be wronged. What's going on now? Wang Linquan's words implied that the Lu family's group of good-for-nothings, from the arrogant Lu Dongjiang to the spoiled and arrogant Lu family's children, how many of them were good people who sincerely considered the Su family's situation? Isn't it just because they read a few more books? In the end, they're all so arrogant, wishing they could occupy Beiliang's officialdom. Only then would they be worthy of their noble status. A group of people who don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. Seeing Su Fengnian turn to look at him, Su Beiji grinned and said, "The last few words were naturally said by me." Even if Wang Linquan drank a few hundred caddies of green ant wine, he definitely wouldn't dare to reveal his true thoughts like this. Su Fengnian said helplessly, "I know you are angry with me because of the matter with the transport of grain, but that's enough. Do you really think I'm a clay bodhisattva who won't get angry?" Su Beiji snorted coldly and said, "Let me put the ugly words first. Qi Yanglong is Qi Yanglong, and the imperial court is the imperial court. Since Zhang Julu's death, an irreparable crack has appeared in the imperial court. The days when the monarch and his ministers were compatible are gone forever. The Zhao family's son of heaven had sent Wen Tai and Ma Zhongxian, one in civil and one in martial arts, to Jing and rode in the hinterland of the Central Plains. Together with Zhao Sun, who was overseeing Qingzhou and Xiangfan, what kind of good intentions could these three people have? I don't know what the atmosphere was like at the small court meeting in the capital at that time, nor do I know if Qi Yanglong, the Grand Secretary, and Huan Wen, the Second Secretary, raised any objections at that time. But since Wen Ma had already left the capital to take up his post, when the time came, the transport of grain would be bumpy, and the emperor would be far away. How difficult would it be to casually find an excuse to deal with the Ministry of Revenue? Qi Yanglong is the head of the Secretariat, not the Minister of the Ministry of Revenue. Huan Wen is in Minxia Province, not the Minister of the Ministry of Appointments. Su Fengnian clutched his chest and pretended to be in pain. Aya, after the successive battles in Great Peace City, my internal injuries are very serious. My chest hurts, and my head hurts. No, I have to go back to the carriage and lie down. The great Northwest vassal king and martial arts grandmaster had slipped away. Qin Shiliang's mouth was full of smiles. Su Beiji turned his head and laughed coldly. If you have the ability, then lie down all the way to the new city outside the pass. After Su Fengnian ran away, there was a moment of silence. Su Beiji glanced at Qin Shiliang, who was riding like he was walking, and said self-mockingly, "When it comes to riding, I'm not as good as you. Right now, my inner thighs feel like they're on fire." Qin Shiliang smiled and said, "Luzhou is vast and sparsely populated. The 2 courier routes from Liangzhou to Qingsang City have just been started. Thus, I had to ride a fast horse for everything. At first, I wasn't used to it. Other than the pain in my waist and back, when I finally fell asleep on the bed, I felt like the world was spinning around me like a drunk person. I was clearly lying down, but it still felt like I was moving up and down on the back of a horse. It was very torturous. But now it's different. Even if there's nothing going on outside the city, if I don't ride a horse for a few dozen li, I feel that something is wrong." Su Beiji's expression was indifferent as he said softly, "After going to the capital, that fellow seemed to have untied a lot of the knots in his heart. In the past, he definitely wouldn't make empty promises. Most likely, he does have some confidence in the next battle of Liang Mang. Since that's the case, why don't we think of things in a positive direction? For example, Luzhou is already part of Beiliang's territory. The better the world is, the higher Luzhou's position in Beiliang will rise. Perhaps in the future, a fifth or sixth zhou will be established in the vast western regions. As the bridge between Beiliang and the western regions, Luzhou will definitely be in high demand. In terms of the military, with Su Longxiang's Longxiang army, even the veteran Liangzhou border army would probably be too embarrassed to go and fight for territory. However, it's hard to say about the positions in the Luzhou provincial governor's manor. Let's not talk about things that are far away. Let's talk about the Lingzhou I just left. Whether it is reputation or merits, logically speaking, Huang Yan, who should have been able to climb up a level, didn't he not become the new Lingzhou provincial governor? From now on, especially when the war is not so tense, that fellow will only have more things to worry about, not less. Chen Shiliang, you've finally opened up a position in Luzhou. Whether it's for your own future or for the situation in Luzhou, you should move your position forward. A county official is not as good as a current official. Even if you become the deputy administrator, it won't be as useful as being a low-level provincial governor in Luzhou. Probably influenced by Su Beiji's honesty, Chen Shiliang also said bluntly, I understand the reasoning. In reality, on this trip to Qingliang Mountain, I've thought about it a lot. As long as the war ends, not only will Luzhou be able to stand on equal footing with the other three provinces in Beiliang, it might even become the most important place in the eyes of the Liang imperial court. Su Beiji nodded and said in a low voice, yes. This is the reasoning. Once Northern Mang cowered back, no longer daring to send troops to the northwestern border, then the imperial court might just send a civil official to Lu province to help Liang oversee the border. At that time, Yang Xinxing wouldn't be able to keep her position as obedient as she was when she assumed the post of Jiedu vice envoy. This move seems preposterous, but there are precedents that can be followed. Putting aside the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, who patrolled the two Liao provinces, with so many regional governors and administrators spread out from Great Peace City, which one of them is easy to deal with? Wang Xiongui, Lu Baijia, Yuan Gua, Han Lin, Wen Tai, Ma Zhongxian. If we don't consider their positions, they can't be considered mediocre. Chen Shiliang frowned and said, I'm just afraid that when the time comes, the imperial court will send the imperial college's left chancellor Yao Baifeng to Luzhou. Chancellor Yao is originally from Beiliang. Even if he is in the imperial court, he has always been close to Beiliang. If this Confucian grandmaster enters Luzhou, no matter if it is the imperial residence or the bureaucracy, they will be happy to see this happen. Su Beiji quickly followed up, yes, just like how Zhang Jiulu is in Liang, he might not be willing to consider everything for the Zhao family. Master Yao's personality is similar to Bai Yan-er's. When he returns to Beiliang, he will most likely have to think about the imperial court. Chen Shiliang smiled bitterly and said, it looks like I should fight for the position of Luzhou's guest emperor. Su Beiji narrowed his eyes and said, to prepare for a rainy day, I think it's best to take in the provincial governor as well. I think the imperial court won't have the face to ask Yao Baifeng to return to Beiliang to be the guest emperor of a province, right? Chen Shiliang smiled and said, being the administrator of a province is perfectly justified. Su Beiji curled his lips and said, being the administrator of Mount Qingliang? Wouldn't he be eaten up by Song Dongming and the others? Besides, if he didn't go to Luzhou, how many Liang officials would dare to follow Yao Baifeng to Beiliang Palace to be an official? Wouldn't they have to wake up early every morning and rub their necks, thankful that their heads are still on their shoulders? Chen Shiliang held back his laughter and nodded. That's true. Suddenly, someone shouted from behind them, Zhu Zi, Shiliang, I suddenly feel better. Why don't you take the carriage and I'll be your coachman? The white horses near the carriage all smiled knowingly. Su Beiji turned to look at his peers and asked, what do you say? Chen Shiliang said in all seriousness, sure. The two riders turned their horses around at the same time. The king of Beiliang, Su Fengnian, who was sitting in the coachman's seat, watched the two Beiliang strategists slowly approach. He suddenly raised his eyes and gazed into the distance. There was a withered scholar from the Tide Listening Pavilion. After his death, he didn't have a grave, so his ashes were scattered outside Biyao Pass. Jiangnan, Jiangbei. South of Nanshan, north of Biyao. Jiangnan was in the south, 3,000 miles long. Biyao had a gravestone, 300,000. Chapter 1661. Before they arrived at the new city outside the pass, the 800 Phoenix Battalion Light Cavalry encountered a small incident that made people not know whether to laugh or cry. The aggressive senior officer Yuan Meng quickly rode to the side of the carriage and reported to the young vassal lord acting as the coachman, "Your Highness, the scouts have reported that there are more than 60 Jianghu martial artists with swords and sabers 1 li northwest of here. They are divided into 2 groups and are rushing this way. Do you need me to bring people to stop them?" Su Fengnian was stunned for a moment and asked with a smile, "Is it a Jianghu feud between the gangs, or is there an ulterior motive?" Yuan Meng opened his bloody mouth and said with a murderous look, "Who cares? Anyway, my brothers have been holding back for too long. Let's use them as an appetizer to go with wine." Su Fengnian waved his hand and said, "Forget it, let's just continue on our way. As long as they don't come close, don't pay them any attention." Seeing that this senior officer who was born in the prime of his life seemed to be unwilling, Su Fengnian used his horsewhip to point at the bridegroom Yu who was not far in front of them and said with a smile, "You're itching for a beating, right? This is Wang Xianji's eldest disciple. Is he enough for you to sweat?" Yuan Meng said resentfully, "Then forget it. Harmony breeds wealth. Harmony breeds wealth." However, the development of the situation made the sullen senior officer Yuan feel very gratified. The 2 groups of Jianghu fish dragons crashed into the long snake formation of the 800 White Horse Cavalry. Yuan Meng could obviously see that the people in the lead wanted to lead the trouble and wanted to muddy the water so that they could escape. One of the young swordsmen who was covered in blood flew over the heads of the White Horse Cavalry and landed on the right side of the slowly advancing cavalry. With him taking the lead, the others behind him all stepped on the tips of their toes and nimbly flipped over the wall of people. If that was all, it would have been fine. However, there were some whose lightness skills were slightly inferior. They couldn't possibly circle around to the back of the light cavalry and escape. After a moment of hesitation, it was unknown who was the one who summoned the courage to shout, "Gentlemen, please make way, please make way, please make way." Then, 5 or 6 reckless fellows attempted to pass through the cavalry formation. Yuan Meng, who was already hot-tempered to begin with, was already burning with rage when someone dared to provoke him. However, when he turned around and saw that his prince was as still as a mountain, he forced himself to endure. In the end, this group of bastards wanted to take an inch and want a mile, wanting to interfere with the marching of the troops. Yuan Meng tilted his head and spat fiercely. He cursed in a low voice and roared at the top of his lungs, "Raise the crossbows. Anyone who dares to come within 10 steps of me will be killed without mercy." The cavalry didn't stop and continued forward, but almost immediately, all the light cavalry raised their light crossbows. The crossbow bolts shone brightly under the sunlight, sending chills down the spines of the Jianghu people. The Jianghu people charging at the very front were so frightened that they stopped in their tracks. They didn't move at all and didn't even dare to breathe loudly. Other than the 5 people on the right who had used their lightness skills to leap over the wall of light cavalry, the rest were blocked on the left side of the cavalry. A middle-aged man wearing a green robe and holding a sword clearly had more experience in the Jianghu. Not only did he indicate to the people around him not to act rashly, he also turned his arm behind his back at the first instant and adopted the posture of carrying a sword on his back to express goodwill to the cavalry. He looked at Yuan Meng, who looked the most like a general, and said in a clear voice, "General, I am Zhang Rongqian of Nanzhao's Tai-Bai Sword Grandmaster. I am currently pursuing 12 unscrupulous criminals with my Jianghu companions. If I have offended your carriage, please forgive me." The Feng Battalion Commandant, who had respectfully called someone "General" in front of the king of Biyao, immediately blushed. This flattery had completely hit the horse's hoof. Yuan Meng angrily rebuked, "F***CK your general. I'm only a 6th-level commandant. You put oil on your mouth. With one look, I can tell that you're not a good person." The middle-aged scholarly swordsman who called himself Zhang Rongqian of the Tai-Bai Sword Grandmaster was somewhat embarrassed. In the end, the Jianghu was all about face. More than 60 Jianghu people had perked up their ears to listen, but in the end, he was scolded by the cavalry commandant who didn't know how to appreciate his kindness. As a Jianghu leader who could rank among the top 10 in the Jianghu world of Nanzhao, no matter how good he was at cultivating his body and mind, he didn't have the willpower to stick his hot face to a cold butt. However, facing a cavalry army of nearly 1,000 people, and one that looked like the elite and valiant Biyao frontier army, Zhang Rongqian, as a person who had crossed the river, didn't have the guts to compete with the local tyrant, especially in Biyao's territory. No matter how good Zhang Rongqian's martial arts were, even if he had 3 heads and 6 arms, he wouldn't be able to cut vegetables. Therefore, Zhang Rongqian only kept a cold face and didn't retort. An old man in embroidered clothes who had been bitten by Zhang Rongqian and hadn't been able to jump over the light cavalry wall was still fiercely arrogant even though he was seriously injured and had a bloody hole in his waist. Right now, with his back to the cavalry, he was facing more than 50 Jianghu enemies and said gloomily, "Zhang Rongqian. You're the #1 hypocrite in Nanzhao who pretends to be righteous and deceives the world. You have the nerve to call us bad people? Our young master has only exposed your old history of killing your brothers and stealing secret manuals to get to the top. If you really have the ability, then come and kill us." A graceful woman in snow-white clothes holding a bright red pipa said softly, "Evil and crooked ways. No matter how glib your tongue is, everyone has the right to punish you." The old man who was covering the wound on his waist sneered and said, "Oh, Fairy Lu of Huainan Dao's misty mountains Dahang Peak has spoken. It's only because time is unforgiving. Otherwise, when this old man was young, I would have slept with at least 30 of you on my bed, if not 50. As for your master, Fairy Flying Cicada, that old hag who likes to show her face in public because of her youthful appearance, this old man didn't even look at her in the past. Didn't she rely on her short-lived relationships with several old men to occupy the last position among the 18 people on Mount Hui's Great Snow Plateau? Does she really think she's that great? Xianyuan Qingfeng killed our sect leader. We hate him, but in the end, we still respect him. He relied on his true ability to kill 6 masters, including our sect leader. But what do you bastards think you are?" Yuan Meng laughed and suddenly didn't want to rush the Phoenix Battalion to chase them away. The white fairy holding the pipa narrowed her eyes and said in a low voice, "Demon King Fuhai, you're courting death." The old man with blood seeping out of his fingers shook his waist and said with a wicked smile, "So, you're looking for this?" Zhang Rongqian seemed to have been staring at the movements of this leader of the demonic path, but the corner of his eye had been paying attention to the movements of the cavalry. This outer sect mountain chieftain of the Tai-Bai sword faction suddenly saw the carriage stop and the young coachman look towards them. But strangely, no one walked out of the carriage, nor did anyone lift up the curtains. It was as if this coachman, who did not know the rules, wanted to watch a good show. Then, he acted on his own initiative and stopped the carriage, causing the entire cavalry to suddenly stop without any orders. Chapter 1662. As the cavalry came to a halt, a suffocating murderous atmosphere instantly appeared. Silence reigned. After waiting for a while, there was no cursing or killing. The young carriage driver seemed to mutter to himself and then quickly drove the carriage forward. Yuan Meng twisted his lips. He raised his arm and clenched his fist before following the carriage forward. The 800 light cavalry put away their light crossbows at the same time. There was no sound. The 2 groups of people watched in shock as the cavalry moved further and further away. For some reason, they forgot to fight to the death. Su Beiji bent down and walked out of the carriage. He leaned against the wall of the carriage and asked with a smile, "You finally ran into me and gave me a chance to pretend to be an expert. Won't you show a few moves?" Su Fengnian smiled and said, "Do you think I'm a street performer who can break stones on my chest? Also, they won't give money." Su Beiji continued to speak sarcastically, "It seems that your injuries in Great Peace City this time were serious. Otherwise, with your temper, especially in front of those fairies and heroines, you would have gotten involved long ago." Su Fengnian shook his head and said, "You have really misunderstood me. In the Jianghu, the greatest taboo is for a grandson to pretend to be a great master. I'm an old man of the Jianghu. I don't mind telling you, why did those two groups of Jianghu men risk their lives? That young master of the demon sect unconsciously touched his chest. Let me tell you, it was most likely a secret manual of Tide Listening Pavilion that he had luckily obtained by killing people. What Tai Bai Sword Sect, Huainan Dao, Misty Mountain, they all said that they were eliminating evil and protecting the Dao, but they were all aiming for the secret manual. As for how to split the spoils afterwards, there was no need to talk about it. The Nanzhao expert surnamed Zhang would definitely do it flawlessly and everyone would be happy. For example, the first volume would belong to me and the second to you. After reading it, the two sects would borrow it from each other. In this way, the two sects that were separated by thousands of mountains and rivers would become staunch allies of the Jianghu. You said in Nanzhao that the flying cicada fairy was a legendary Jianghu figure that everyone had high hopes for. I said in Misty Mountain that your Tai Bai sword sect was actually not inferior to the Dongyue sword pool. Everyone would gain face. Maybe a few elders will sit down and make peace, and then let the two young talents of their respective sects become immortal companions. It will be another great story, and they will boast about it for several years. Su Beiji gave him a thumbs up and clicked his tongue. Your Highness, you're really good. You're really good at this. Su Fengnian was silent for a moment before he smiled. That's how the Jianghu is. I can't say whether it's good or bad, but it's a pity that it's too similar to Jianghu. Su Beiji sighed. According to what you said, there is no place in this world where there is no Jianghu. Su Fengnian, whose back was facing Zhu Zi, nodded and said, I guess so. As they approached the new city, there were more and more groups of Jianghu people. Her background was somewhat similar to Zhang Rongxian's. They were both the first to follow Xianyuan Qingfeng to the western region to kill demons. In the end, after the purple-clothed woman killed so that there was no one left to kill, she instigated the righteous Jianghu people to join the army at the Beiliang border. After that, she disappeared without a trace. Most of the older Jianghu heroes did not really come to the border. Most of them were in Liangzhou or Lingzhou, traveling the mountains and rivers while practicing martial arts. Otherwise, they would try to get in touch with the Fish Dragon Gang, which was one of the top 10 gangs in the world. When traveling the Jianghu, they always looked at the Buddha's face. There was a world of difference between whether they had made a name for themselves or not. Even when Su Fengnian was at the bottom of the Jianghu in his early years, he had seen a few street fights because the helpers each side called knew each other. In the end, the fight did not end, but they drank wine. The knife did not move, but the chopsticks did. The travel permits issued by the local government in Liang were not enough for these Jianghu people to go to the dangerous military towns like Huda City and Huaiyang Pass. Most of them stopped near the new city. Only a few people who were led by the high-ranking members of the Fish Dragon Gang could get a little closer to the border. However, enlisting in the army to kill Beimang barbarians was out of the question. They could just take it as a trip to the desert beyond the Great Wall. If they were lucky, they could see dozens of crossbowmen on white horses whizzing past. If they were even luckier, they could see the large-scale cavalry moving from the north to the south. Compared to the two groups of people who had poor eyesight, these young heroes who mingled around the new city knew more about the inside story of Beiliang under the influence of what they saw and heard. Moreover, the 800 light cavalry could be led by the 2,000 elite cavalry stationed here. How could there not be a big shot in the light cavalry? It was easy to guess with one's buttocks. Plus, this light cavalry was full of white armor and white horses. As long as one was not blind or stupid, one could guess what kind of big shot had come to this new city that Beiliang valued so much. When the white horses passed by, a bald young man suddenly ran toward the cavalry and shouted, King of Beiliang, I'm Lu Dian of Liaodong. I want to challenge you. However, before this bald man could get close to the carriage, Yuan Meng, the only person in the cavalry who was equipped with a long spear, grabbed the shaft of the spear and slightly stepped out of the formation. With a slight shake of his wrist, the long spear spun in his hand and lightly knocked the tall young man's abdomen with the end of the spear. This bold uninvited guest was sent flying on the spot. The strength was just right. It did not injure this person, nor did it make him swagger into the carriage. Lu Dian, whose body was bent like a bow in the air, fell to the ground on his butt. When he finally recovered, he looked at the carriage and shouted, "King of Biyao, don't go. If you have the ability, give me, Lu Dian, a weapon that suits me." Unfortunately, the cavalry was already rushing toward the new city. Lu Dian sat on the ground and sighed. It was a pity that he could not say the heroic words that he had been preparing for a long time. I, Lu Dian, like to drink the strongest wine, use the strongest saber, and ride the fastest horse. I, Lu Dian, left Liaodong when I was 20 years old. I have lived for 3 years and 2,000 miles. What a pity. The young man rubbed his stomach and suddenly lowered his head to secretly smile. Fortunately, the name Lu Dian would have some fame in the martial arts world of the Central Plains in the future, right? Lu Dian did not have any extra words to say, but many of the heroes standing in the distance took advantage of the opportunity to shout. It was nothing more than someone who was determined to fight all the heroes in the world, or someone who was determined to defeat all the grandmasters in the world with one sword strike. There was even someone who shouted, "My life is in my own hands, not in the hands of the heavens. If the heavens want to kill me, I will kill the heavens." The only thing that could be compared to this was probably someone who said, "Everyone in the world is unfaithful. I will kill Buddha if I see Buddha, I will kill God if I see God." On the other side of the carriage, Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang, who were sitting in the carriage, looked at each other. Could it be that the young heroes of Jianghu nowadays all had such lofty ambitions? However, it was a pity that the young king, who was one of the grandmasters of martial arts evaluation, was not here. There was someone that Su Fengnian wanted to meet. Chapter 1663. Su Fengnian and Su Yanbing quietly left the team early. Under the guidance of a spy from the whisk room, they came to a slope 7 or 8 miles northwest of the new city. Occasionally, a group of crossbowmen would pass by in the distance. Compared to the past, there were 1 or 2 more cavalrymen in light armor who did not carry a cold saber or light crossbow. These people were the Jianghu people who had been selected by the border army of Liangzhou and the Whispering Room. According to the confidential military files of the Huaiyang Pass Protectorate, more than 200 Jianghu experts from the Central Plains had been secretly recruited into the border army. This was undoubtedly a timely supplement for the crossbowmen in the border army who often died in a battle on a narrow path. After all, in the first battle of Liangmang, the northern Liang scouts had suffered a great loss. When Su Fengnian saw the figure of a man and 2 horses on the top of the slope, he did not let Su Yanbing follow him. He turned over and dismounted from the horse alone and led it forward. That tall and sturdy figure that was still sitting on the ground on the hillside didn't stand up to welcome the young vassal king's arrival either. He only raised his head and narrowed his eyes as he looked at this young man who was currently viewed as a heaven-class great demon by Northern Mang. Su Fengnian loosened the reins and patted the back of the horse. The horse from Belyang's Shinli Ranch stepped lightly on the horse's hooves and went to look for horsegrass alone. Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Senior, why did you come back to Belyang this time?" The old man, who was addressed as Senior, was wearing a thick and heavy mink coat. When he stood up, a series of clattering noises could be heard, revealing 2 thick iron chains. Hanging from his waist were 2 hiltless sabers with an astonishing aura. The old man stretched out his palms that were the size of praying mats and patted his buttocks. Instantly, the dust scattered in all directions. He grinned and said, "Little Su, I heard that after you ran back from the Northern Mang, your martial cultivation improved by leaps and bounds. You even killed Wang Xinji. After that, Tuoba Bodhisattva, Dong Tai, Chao Chongqing, and the other 3 great grandmasters, you also defeated them all? You are in the limelight now. I am not convinced, so I came from Beimang and Heshi to fight with you. What do you think?" Su Fengnian looked around and then suddenly ran to the tall old man's side in a flattering manner. He rubbed the old man's shoulders and said, "Senior Chu, old immortal Chu, Master Chu. Are you tired after such a long journey? Do you want to drink wine and eat meat?" The old man surnamed Chu calmly accepted the king of Belyang's flattery. He did not have the domineering attitude he had when he came to cause trouble. He smiled and looked at the guy he had watched grow up with his own eyes. "It looks like you were really injured in Great Peace City. Otherwise, with your arrogance, you would have already turned against me and fought with me for hundreds of rounds. Su Fengnian said angrily, a starving camel is still bigger than a horse. Senior, don't be so shameless. If I accidentally beat you down and you ran back to Beimang in a fit of pique and delayed Helian Wui's important task, who would I cry to? The old man blew his beard and glared. He pressed his hands on his saber and was about to fight. Unfortunately, the young man was shameless and allowed him to beat and scold him. The old man with snow-white hair sighed and shook his shoulders. He refused the young man's insincere kneading. You are so cunning. That's right, it was Helian Wei who asked me to come to Biyao. There are two things, one good news and one bad news. Which one do you want to hear first? Su Fengnian said with a smile, let's hear the bad news first. It's only sweet when you eat sugar cane. The old man who had been trapped at the bottom of Tidehark Lake for many years said in a deep voice, Helian Wei and I are both guests of the Big Idea branch of Beimang's princess tomb. I didn't hide it from you last time. However, so many years have passed, and we no longer care about the princess tomb. Even Luo Yang has gone to Mount Zhulu. It's said that little idea with half-face makeup was slapped to death by Huyan Dagwan. Therefore, whether it's me or Helian Wei, we are both here to pay our debts. Once this matter is settled, we will go our separate ways in the future. Su Fengnian rolled his eyes and said, all right. Let's get down to business. This king has a myriad of affairs to attend to every day. What he worries about is the general trend of the world. In the end, Su Fengnian didn't fight back after being slapped by the old man. It was as if he didn't have such thoughts at all. He only touched his head, which didn't make him look very handsome. Instead, he touched a lot of fine sand. It was a bleak scene to ride a horse in the northwest Great Desert. After the old man scolded him jokingly, he stopped smiling and said with a rare solemn tone, this bad news isn't small at all. Have you heard of the Beimang Princess Qingwan? Her public identity is Fan Bainu. When you were still Beiyang's His Royal Highness, this woman had been flirting with Qin Jibao for a long time. In fact, to be precise, she should be called Yelu Bainu. She's a true member of the Beimang royal family. She has a feud with the old woman surnamed Murong for killing her father. In the past, she could only endure the humiliation to survive. Now, it's different. After such a big defeat, the old woman's two trusted subordinates, the Taiping Commandant and Dongjua, are respectively in Norland and Southern dynasties. They're not having a good time. Su Fengnian nodded and said, this is reasonable. At that time, whether to attack Beiyang or Liao first was because they wanted to attack Gu Jiantang first. Otherwise, the old woman wouldn't have let Tuoba Bodhisattva lead hundreds of thousands of elite cavalry to patrol the grasslands of Norland before the Battle of Liangmang. In the end, it was to suppress those Yelu princes and the grassland tyrants. If this time they successfully took down Beiyang, it would be fine. They would be able to conquer the Central Plains soon. Even if it was painful, they could still bear it. But since they didn't even enter Beiyang, it's a different matter. No one would be willing to die without any gains, especially those Beimang barbarians who have been used to plundering the borders and returning with great gains for hundreds of years. The old man glanced at the calm young man and wanted to say something but stopped. He curled his lips and gave up on the digression. Instead, the old man continued the previous topic and said, the ambitious Yelu Dongchuang returned to Beimang. This kid couldn't have caused any trouble, but he had a good grandfather, Yelu Hongkai, who had followed Beimang for 3 dynasties. This old man could really be called an old man. When the holy sect Yelu Wenshu burped, Yelu Hongkai, as one of the 6 people in front of the emperor's bed, was ranked last. He wasn't a big shot. When Shenzong died, there were 5 people, and he was ranked 3rd. When the former emperor of Beimang was tortured to death by the old woman, there were 5 people in Beimang who were important ministers. Su boy, do you know who they were? Su Fengnian smiled and said, General Yelu Shulai, a remnant of the Central Plains, Su Huainan, Tuoba Bodhisattva, and Murong Baoding. It was clear that Yelu Shulai was already quite old at the time, only able to barely obtain a seat as the leader of the Northern Mang army's older generation. Meanwhile, Su Huainan and Tuoba Bodhisattva, one civil, one military, were both trusted aides personally promoted by the old woman. As for Murong Baoding, there was even less of a need to talk about it. One could tell just by looking at the surname. In that case, Yelu Hongkai, the only trusted aide of the Northern Mang old emperor, had to use his own strength to shelter the entire Yelu family. However, in the past 10 years or so, other than quarreling with Dong Zhuo when he was drawing ashes to discuss official business, the old man had almost never made a sound out of the Norland. Without a backbone, the Yelu princes and the prairie warden were naturally greatly disappointed with this old man. The old man sighed and said, Helian Wuwei privately told me that this time, the Yelu of Beimang had finally banded together and allowed that Princess Qinghuan to quietly enter the central plains of Liang. They must have drawn a big pie for Qinjibao, a big pie as big as the sky. Su Fengnian frowned and said, Will Qinjibao agree? Chapter 1664. The old man sneered, I don't know about the schemes of the imperial court, but old man Helian said that during the Guangling War, Liang treated Qinjibao as the king of Shu with an attitude of using him but not putting him in an important position. It's obvious that they were suspicious of him. After West Chu was conquered, Wu Zhongshuan and Lu Xingxiang would most likely fight for first place, followed by Song Li and the other young generals. Qinjibao would at most be ranked ahead of Guangling Prince Zhao Yi and Yanqi Prince Zhao Bing. Perhaps even King of Jing'an, Zhao Sun, wouldn't compare to him. Do you think that someone as proud and arrogant as Qinjibao, someone who even Li Yang's previous emperor, Zhao Dun, regarded as the white-clothed war saint, wouldn't have any grievances? In any case, even I, a layman, feel that Qinjibao would be sullen. The war of Liang Mang had nothing to do with him, and the war of the Tu Liao had nothing to do with him. He finally got out of Western Shu, but in the end, he could only eat leftovers in Guangling Circuit. The so-called war saint title? Isn't it just a joke? Su Fengnian muttered to himself, if Xie Guanyin hadn't suffered a crushing defeat in the capital, this assumption wouldn't have been possible. But now, Fan Bainu, Yelu Dongchuang, Yelu Hongkai, are they the same Su Shao who promised Qinjibao to be the new Beimang dynasty? Each of us is asking a tiger for its skin. Will Qinjibao agree to Northern Mang because he thinks that one day, he will have the opportunity to rule the north and south and accomplish what Su Shao didn't do back then? The old man didn't disturb Su Fengnian's contemplation. Su Fengnian suddenly turned his head and asked, what about Gu Jiantang? I don't think he'll be roped in by Beimang. Even with Wang Sui leading the Eastern Front, the chances of victory are only 50-50. Hasn't Beimang thought about how to deal with this troublesome last famous general of the spring and autumn period? The old man clicked his tongue and laughed, you two are indeed the old fox and the little fox. Helian Wuwei has already expected this. The old man smiled and said, you two are indeed the old fox and the little fox. Helian Wuwei has already predicted this. The old man smiled and said, let you guess. Su Fengnian squatted down and subconsciously grabbed a handful of hot yellow sand. He thought for a long time, although Liao King Zhao Wu is a hindrance, the two Liao countries are still considered an iron bucket. Then the breakthrough can only be moved to the west. Between Liaodong and Beimang, there aren't many people who can be ranked. Jidishi Kai Nan, Administrator Han Lin, General of Hezhou, and Deputy General are all puppets who were scared out of their wits by our Beimang cavalry. There's no need to say much. But Ji Zhou, King of Han Zhao Xiong, I can't see through this vassal king. When I and the Phoenix Battalion passed by Ji Zhou, this king with the same title as the emperor dared to come to my camp alone and chat with me. Next, Yuan Tingshan, Yang Huchen, and Han Fang, the three generals in power in Ji Zhou. Yuan Tingshan has his father-in-law Gu Jiantang and Li Jiayuan Castle as his backing. They're both support and restraint. Yang Huchen is going to Ji Zhou to atone for his crime. There's no need for him to be a spy for Beimang. Han Fang, to be honest, he's a chess piece I set up years ago. He's not loyal to Liang, but at the very least, he won't betray Liang for Beimang. The valiant Lai Han family has been fighting with the nomads in the north for 300 to 400 years. Hundreds of people with the surname Han have died. Anyone can join Beimang, but Han Feng won't. The old man stood beside Su Fengnian and looked into the distance. His eyes were filled with yellow sand and desolation. Now that I've told you the bad news, let's talk about the good news. But I don't know if this is good news. Su Fengnian, who was squatting with his back against the wind, opened his palm. The wind blew the sand away, and he said softly, "Senior, please tell me." The old man said in a heavier tone, "Su Fengnian, you should know that Helian Wue is in Beimang. He's one of the people who firmly support the old lady. This time, I'm able to pass through the border of the southern dynasty that's full of spiders and crow's fences and arrive at Biyao without a sound. Of course, it's not because I'm capable. It's because Helian Wue and the old lady had an extremely secret conversation. There's no fourth person present except for the imperial peace warrant. The old lady told Helian Wue that since the Yelu family of Beimang dared to risk everything to cooperate with Qin Jibao, she also has the courage to ally with you, Su Fengnian. She'll pay more. As long as you agree to betray Liang, even if you can't take a single soldier from Beiyang, she'll help you to a seat that you can't even imagine." Su Fengnian shook his head and smiled. "This old woman is crazy." The old man sighed. "People who are about to die are all the same." Su Fengnian was stunned. "This is good news." The old man sighed. "Wrong, very wrong. The last thing Helian Wue wanted me to tell you is that if you refuse the goodwill of the Beimang Empress, Beimang will fight to the death in the next southern expedition." Su Fengnian said indifferently, "Let's not talk about whether I agree or not. So many people have died in the past 20 years outside Beiyang. They've already given me an answer." The old man smiled. "Whether you agree or not is up to you, Su Fengnian. I'm the one who sent the message. From now on, whether Liang Mang lives or dies has nothing to do with me." Su Fengnian stood up slowly and clapped his hands. He smiled. "Why don't we fight? I've always remembered what you said all these years. No matter whether I can beat you or not, we'll talk about it after we fight." The old man said seriously, "No, no, no. A senior should have the demeanor of a senior. Besides, you're injured. Even if I beat you, I'll still be suspected of taking advantage of you." Su Fengnian smiled but didn't say anything. The old man's face turned red. He glared at him and said, "Brat. Don't push your luck." Su Fengnian laughed. The old man stretched out his hand and patted the young king's shoulder. He looked a little melancholy. "You almost drowned at the bottom of the Tidehark Lake for the first time. You were saved by me. Later, you would go down to the lake to hold your breath. Or you would bring me food. To be honest, I watched you grow from a child to the king of Beiyang today." Su Fengnian was a little embarrassed. He said awkwardly, "When I was in a bad mood in the early years, I often brought things to the bottom of the lake to tease you. I hope you don't take it to heart." The old man was speechless. Su Fengnian shut his mouth. He didn't want to rub salt on the old man's wound. The old man laughed heartily and said, "On the way here, I heard that Liang Jianghu no longer mentions you, the high and mighty 14 Wushu judges. You're too high and unattainable. To be honest, Grandpa knows his own limits. I've beaten up a bunch of monsters like you before. However, I'd really like to meet those so-called 4 sages top 10 masters and those 14 auspicious talisman champions who copied the 13 armors of spring and autumn." Su Fengnian nodded and reminded him, "Although many of them are masters fishing for fame, there are some famous masters on the list. It's better not to provoke them. For example, Suatia Valley's Yu Groom in Beiyang, Wulin Alliance Master Xianyuan Qingfeng, Dongyue's Sword Pool's Chai Qingshan, Nanzhao's No. 1 Wei Miao, Nanjiang's Blade Master Mao Shulang, Dragon Palace's Qing Baishuang." The old man's face became uglier and uglier. He said angrily, "Brat, just tell me. Who can I beat?" Su Fengnian rubbed his chin and said, "You'll have to think about it." The old man was not in the mood to listen to Su Fengnian's nonsense. He got on his horse and rode 2 horses. He was about to go south to the Central Plains to explore Jianghu. Su Fengnian said with a smile, "Don't let me hear that you've just returned to Jianghu and you've already been beaten down." The burly old man sat high on the horse and said angrily, "Brat, just wait for me to kill everyone in Jianghu in the Central Plains." The old man rode down the hill. Su Fengnian suddenly looked at the old man's back and shouted, "Old man, I was able to believe in the idea I had when I was young and go to Wudang to practice martial arts because I saw you at the bottom of the lake. That made me believe that there are indeed masters in this world. There were masters and immortals in Jianghu. One person could really fight against 10,000 people. Only then could he have the chance to take revenge with his own strength." That was why Su Fengnian was extremely grateful to this old man whose shoulder blades were nailed with iron chains. This was the Jianghu senior who made him grit his teeth and persist on climbing the martial path. The old man did not turn his head and shouted, "Pretentious. If you have the ability." The old man suddenly realized that he could not say anything to attack this brat. "If you have the ability to become the best in the world?" This brat did not die at Wang Xianji's hands. He fought thousands of miles with Tuoba Bodhisattva and even fought against 2 people in Great Peace City. Jianghu was like this. When had he ever lost in court? In the end, the old man who was almost at the foot of the hill roared, "Su Fengnian, if you have the ability, then die after me. Brat, remember, when the time comes, don't forget to get me some good wine and meat." Chapter 1665. Su Fengnian waited until the old man and his 2 horses disappeared from sight. He whistled, and the cold horse galloped over. Su Fengnian mounted the horse. On the way to the new city, Su Yanbing saw that Su Fengnian was worried. He could not help but ask, "Is there a big problem?" Su Fengnian smiled bitterly. "Not really. It's just that there are some unexpected things. There might be new variables on the side of Gu Jiantang and Chen Jibao." Su Yanbing said somewhat guiltily, "At that time in Great Peace City, firstly, Chen Jibao was not willing to fight to the death. Secondly, I did not dare to force him to fight to the death with all my heart. If I had known earlier, I would have decided victory and defeat with him there." Su Yanbing's so-called victory and defeat was, of course, life and death. Su Fengnian turned his head and said helplessly, "Uncle Su, if you say it like that, you are really pretentious." Su Yanbing was silent. Su Fengnian said softly, "I've thought about it for a long time. There is only one possibility that can change the situation between the 2 Liao countries, and that is Yuan Tingshan's betrayal from Ji province. If it's true, this mad dog is too obsessed. He doesn't even care about the life and death, honor and disgrace of his 2 wives and 2 fathers-in-law." Su Yanbing did not have any expression of disbelief. He said calmly, "It is not strange for this kind of fence-sitter to do anything." Su Fengnian nodded. "It is true that there are all kinds of strange things in the boundless universe. There will always be some people who can do things that you cannot imagine." Su Yanbing asked, "Should I go to Ji province and kill him?" Su Fengnian shook his head and said with a smile, "No need. If he does not seek death, Han Fang and Yang Huchen, as his deputies, will not be able to take the position easily. When he is defeated and escapes, perhaps I will personally send him on his way." When the 2 riders were still a few miles away from the new city, several riders arrived. Among them, there was Shangyin Academy's Lu Wenbao, a loser. This scholar had been used for most of his life. After joining Su Fengnian, he went to Great Peace City and then Mount Qingliang. Finally, he was placed in a city in the western regions. With Fu Shui House as his backer, he quickly stood out among the entangled forces. At the beginning, Lu Wenbao was only used as a cover for Chao Wei's 10,000 cavalry, as well as to make it easier for him to secretly contact the 6 jewels Bodhisattva of Mount Lantua. No one would have thought that in the Battle of Qingsang City, Liang Meng and Lu Wenbao's trump cards would be used. Lu Wenbao's contributions could not go unnoticed. Now, this old scholar was the newly established governor of Linyao County in Liuzhou. Chao Wei, who wasn't able to lead the 10,000 cavalry directly into northern Mang's southern dynasty's hinterland as expected, had a much worse expression on his face. Moreover, these 10,000 elite cavalry had suffered quite a bit of losses outside of Azure City. Not long ago, they had been fighting with Flo Province General Ko Jianghu and the Dragon Elephant Army over the source of troops, causing quite a bit of unhappiness. There was also a beautiful woman full of heroic spirit. She was the famous widow in the western regions, Madame Chai of the Sima family, Chai Dongdi. At that time, Su Fengnian had helped her and her family during the turmoil against the Sima family, and then rushed to the Battle of Qingsang City. Other than the monk soldiers of Mount Lantua, which was the main reinforcement, she and Lu Wenbao had roped in nearly 3,000 cavalry troops that could not be underestimated. Half of them were the forces that the Sima family had urgently gathered, and the other half were the strong horse gang that Madame Chai had enticed with real money. Of course, this troop was not worth mentioning in a frontal battle, but in the aftermath of the battle, they performed outstandingly. Furthermore, this Madame Chai had taken all the rewards for this troop in the name of her family. She did not let the Biyao frontier army and Lu Zhou pay a single copper coin. At that time, Su Fengnian and Tuoba Bodhisattva were about to fight in the city. She had promised that as long as Su Fengnian helped the Sima family stabilize the situation, she and her family would do their best to fight to the death for Biyao. Su Fengnian and Chai Dongdi probably did not expect that she would fulfill her promise so quickly. Su Fengnian also did not expect that this woman would personally lead her troops into battle. A promise was worth 1,000 gold. These 4 words were not exaggerated at all. Women could also be chivalrous. There were also many women who were chivalrous. Now that they had reunited, without waiting for Su Fengnian to speak, Chao Wei asked with a straight face, "Your Highness, if you want me to return to Lu Zhou to fight in that battle, Chao Wei will not object. However, out of the 10,000 elite troops under my command, less than half of them are left. Can you give me a definite answer? When will you be able to replenish them?" Su Fengnian smiled and asked, "Less than half? Why don't I go and take a look? If there are a few people missing, I will personally ask the Liangzhou frontier army to replenish them for you." Chao Wei suddenly smiled and said, "How can I trouble your highness? I can't, absolutely can't. Right now, several cavalry units in the border army are scattered. I, Chao Wei, am not the kind of person who can't see the big picture. Just give me 4,000 cavalry units, just 4,000. Su Fengnian said in a bad mood, "From now on, the military town of Linyao of the 3 towns in Lu Zhou will be under your command. At the same time, the left cavalry outside the pass can only be transferred to you for 2,000 cavalry units. I can also give you 2,000 soldier monks from the western regions to be responsible for defending Linyao. As for how many cavalry units you can raise in Lu Zhou, that will depend on your own ability. However, I will only give you 15,000 soldiers and provisions. You will have to deal with the rest yourself." Seeing that Chao Wei still wanted to bargain, Su Fengnian sneered and said, "Do you still want the 2,000 left cavalry?" Chao Wei was already grinning from ear to ear. He quickly wiped his mouth with his hand, trying to hide his ecstasy. 2,000 left cavalry and 2,000 soldier monks, a total of 4,000 people. Especially with the unlimited right to recruit soldiers in Lu Zhou, this was too tempting. Su Fengnian nodded to Lu Wenbao and then looked at Madame Chai. "This time, the Sima family has lent a helping hand to the defense of Qingsang City. I, Biyao, am extremely grateful." Madame Chai smiled sweetly and reached out to tidy up her hair. She said in a soft voice, "It cannot be compared to your Highness Biyao cavalry. No matter how much money you have, it cannot be bought. Everyone in the western regions is a fugitive. As long as the price is fair, we can sell and afford it. It just so happens that the Sima family has roots in the western regions for several generations and the amount of money you have is considerable. However, this time, we have contributed money to repay your Highness' help. We do not owe each other anything. Does your Highness have any objections?" Su Fengnian smiled, "Of course I do not have any objections. In fact, I have taken advantage of you." Chao Wei looked at the elegant king of Biyao and then looked at the charming Madame Chai. He whispered, "What advantage? Where did you get it from?" Lu Wenbao coughed and turned to look at the scenery. Madame Chai's face turned red. Su Fengnian sneered, "Chao Wei, the 2,000 soldier monks are gone. There is no room for discussion. Chao Wei rolled down from his horse and hugged Su Fengnian's leg. He said with tears in his eyes, "Your Highness, the matter between you and Madame Chai, I did not see anything." "I will not say half a word." Su Fengnian became angry. "The 2,000 left cavalry are also gone." Chao Wei sat on the ground and cried, "The world is not fair." Su Fengnian took a deep breath. "Quickly get out of here. Go to the left cavalry tent and ask Jianghu for 2,000 soldiers." Chao Wei stood up at an astonishing speed and jumped onto his horse. He turned his horse around and galloped away, disappearing from sight. Lu Wenbao carefully asked, "Your Highness, this humble one will also go back first?" Su Fengnian angrily said, "Get out together." Su Fengnian originally thought that with Su Yanbing by his side, they would not be alone. Unexpectedly, Su Yanbing squeezed the horse's belly and slowly passed by him. She said, "Your Highness, please rest assured. I did not see anything and will not say anything." Su Fengnian was stunned. Madame Chai's eyebrows curved as she smiled. Su Fengnian helplessly said, "Not a single honest person." Unlike when Chao Wei and the others were present, Madame Chai had already retracted her smile. Her eyes were clear as she said in a deep voice, "Your Highness, I have a request. Is it possible for our Sima clan to lead troops to the west of Lu region, the Soaring Phoenix army town? It would be best if we could get a deputy general position." Su Fengnian asked in surprise, "Madame Chai, you won't regret it? This means that we will be tied to Biyao. If Biyao is defeated in the future, the Sima family will have no room to maneuver." Madame Chai nodded with a firm expression. Su Fengnian curiously asked, "Why?" Madame Chai suddenly smiled and asked, "What does your Highness think?" Su Fengnian teased, "It can't be that Madame Chai covets my beauty, right?" Madame Chai was stunned. She then smiled charmingly and said, "Your Highness, are you flirting with a good woman in broad daylight? Aren't you afraid that I will call for help? Isn't that retainer not far away? I believe that there will be death soldiers protecting you in the dark, right?" Su Fengnian's expression was normal as he smiled, "Madame Chai, don't tease me. Let's be serious." Chapter 1666. Madame Chai tilted her head slightly. She did not look like a young woman who was already a mother. Instead, she looked like a young girl. What was even more amazing was that her posture did not give people the slightest bit of ill will. Instead, it gave people a strange kind of charm and temptation. Su Fengnian took the lead in riding his horse slowly. He said softly, "If Madame Chai is betting that my Biyao will win so that the Sima family can have a place in the future Biyao or the Liyang dynasty, then I can tell Madame Chai that you don't need to place your bet. You don't need to bring your entire family to this murderous gambling table. If there is really a day when the war ends, I will definitely not treat the Sima family unfairly. No matter what, I still remember that there was a stubborn little girl who cut her own hand just to get Su Fengnian to sign his name." Su Fengnian then turned his head to Madame Chai, who was riding side by side, and smiled happily. He said, "I'm a little proud. I don't want to say anything to those Biyao men. I don't want to make them feel unbalanced. Take Chao Wei for example. I'm more handsome than him, my martial arts are better than his, and the most important thing is that I'm taller than him. If I were to provoke him, it would be too unkind. But Madame Chai is a woman, so there's no harm in saying it." Madame Chai said softly, "Your Highness really doesn't treat Chai Dongdi as an outsider." Su Fengnian raised his hands and begged bitterly, "Madame Chai, please let me go." Madame Chai held her belly and laughed. Su Fengnian glanced at them from the corner of his eyes, intentionally or unintentionally. The mountains were rising and falling. Su Fengnian actually had no distracting thoughts in his mind. He was reminiscing about the past, but he was also reminiscing about the past. Madame Chai suddenly straightened her back and looked towards the direction of the new city, muttering, "I am staking everything on this one throw. I want to obtain an official position for the Sima family. Of course, I am not lying. Who doesn't want their family to be able to hold the position for generations to come? I, Chai Dongdi, am only a woman who lives in daily life, but I have also read books. My vision is a bit more farsighted than that of ordinary rural women. Since I have married into the Sima family, I want to be worthy of the Sima family. The prince said that not only Biyao, perhaps the western regions in the future will also be a place like a paradise. There will be private schools and the sound of studying everywhere. Every family will have elderly people enjoying their old age in peace, and every family will have a woman who can peacefully take care of her husband and children. Life like this was really good. Just thinking about it makes me happy. Su Fengnian nodded. Madame Chai suddenly smiled and blinked her eyes. She turned her head and said wittily, I am a woman, whose looks are passable. No matter what I think of the prince, I still want to be liked by men. Especially those men who don't want to pounce on me the moment they see me. If he is always a gentleman, he will feel disappointed in his heart. Just like how the prince said that he is proud of himself, he can only say these things to some women. I can only say these things to the prince. Su Fengnian was speechless. When he was young, when he was drunk and whipped a famous horse, he only thought about how to pretend to be heroic. When he really matured, he actually went upstairs alone most of the time. There was no one beside him, and he went upstairs alone. Madame Chai looked at the young king's side profile and asked softly, will Beimeng attack Biyao again with the power of the whole country? Su Fengnian hesitated for a moment and said, it was supposed to be like this, but now there are signs of internal strife in Beimeng. The Murong and Yilu families might split. Of course, I will do my best to add fuel to the fire. However, the possibility of this is not high, and I can't have high hopes. I can only plan for the worst. Gu Jiantang took the initiative to attack earlier because he saw this clue. He was afraid that the Yilu family would take over the Beimeng court and use the two Liao provinces as a breakthrough point for the army to invade the south. Otherwise, with Gu Jiantang's temperament, he would never act so quickly. Madame Chai, you have heard these words, but don't tell others. Madame Chai nodded and said, of course, I know the severity of this matter. Su Fengnian raised his horsewhip and pointed towards the distant north. With a heavy expression, he said, after Huda's city was captured by Dongzhua, more than half of it was destroyed. More importantly, after the northern Mang's armies retreated far away, this king of the south courtyard's 100,000 private soldiers and Tuoba Bodhisattva's elite cavalry are still eyeing covetously at the border. This is to prevent our northern Liang from going all out to repair Huda's city. In the end, once the great battle of Liang and Mang breaks out, the tug-of-war between Huda's city and the Dragon Eye Plains is destined to be very tragic. It might not lose out to Azure City. Then, with Huayang Pass as the core, the front line of Liuya and Fuling. After that, He Zhonghu's left cavalry will enter the battlefield and defend the northern part of the new city. Compared to the previous three-front battle, Beimeng won't be distracted by the Gourd Gate in Yuzhou. Beiliang has already used the heads of Jingguan and Yang Yuanzan to prove that Beimeng can't leave that battlefield. In this way, not only will the smoke outside Liangzhou Pass rise, but the entire defense line in Liuzhou will also bear a heavy burden. Of course, Liuzhou's general Yan Wenluan and the new commander of the cavalry, Yu Wandao, will also move to Liangzhou. This will make Beimeng's army unhappy and many people will die. Su Fengnian tightened his grip on his horsewhip. Compared to my previous anger, I feel much better now. Because of this trip to the capital, I know that not everyone thinks that Beiliang's death in battle is a matter of course. There are still many people who feel injustice for Beiliang. Madame Chai said softly, is Beiliang content with just this? Su Fengnian shook his head. It's not content. It's just that when Beiliang's people face the north and die, they realize that there are not only people who are mocking and ridiculing them, but also people who are filled with grief, indignation, and guilt. It's not that, for some reason, Su Fengnian didn't continue. Su Fengnian said softly, I, Su Fengnian, am Su Zhao's son. In this life, I don't have the right to feel sorry for myself. These are my heartfelt words. I'm not lying. But I hope. Su Fengnian paused for a moment. His eyes were resolute. Before the battle with Tuoba Bodhisattva, the 6-pearl Bodhisattva of Mount Lantua gave me a blade and a sword. The name of the sword is really good. The name of the sword is loud. Therefore, I hope that the people of the Central Plains don't expect them to be grateful. I also don't expect them to fight in the cold. I only hope that the entire Central Plains can hear the sound of Bailiang's 300,000 cavalry marching north from the northwest border. Hearing this heroic, loud, will allow them to stop pretending to be mute and deaf. Madame Chai pursed her lips and looked at him in a daze. Su Fengnian suddenly smiled. We're here. As they approached the new city, Su Yanbing and Lu Wenbao were quietly waiting for them. Madame Chai reined in her horse. Your Highness, I won't be going to the new city. I'll just take it that Your Highness has agreed to give the Sima family a deputy general in the Phoenix Division. Su Fengnian also stopped his horse. He turned his head and said helplessly, all right. Su Fengnian cupped his fists and sent them off. Then, he slowly moved forward. Suddenly, Madame Chai called out softly from behind him. Su Fengnian. Su Fengnian didn't turn his head at all. He continued to speed up. Madame Chai laughed loudly. I, Chai Dongdi, will be waiting for you in the western region. I want to give birth to your child. Su Fengnian fled in panic. Su Yanbing looked at the young king who seemed to be sweating profusely. He held back his laughter and gave him a thumbs up. Lu Wenbao also gave him a thumbs up. But when the prince stared at him with a murderous look, the Linyuan county governor resentfully retracted his thumb. But Lu Wenbao, who seemed to be ready to die, suddenly gave him a thumbs up again. He didn't want to put it down. Many years later, in the western region's Feng province, after the snow stopped, a woman's hair had turned white. She sat in a wheelchair with a warm and heavy blanket on her knees. She smiled and looked into the distance. She closed her eyes and fell asleep. In a trance, she seemed to have waited for many years. The old woman's eyes were filled with tears as she whispered. When she was about to die, she suddenly tried to open her eyes. She finally smiled. Her vision was blurry. She looked at the person squatting beside her and said in a hoarse voice, "It's a little late." The person nodded and said, "I made you wait for a long time." She shook her head slightly and tried to raise her hand. It seemed like she wanted to tidy up her hair. But she didn't have the energy to do it. So, she felt a little regretful. The person helped her gather the blanket and said softly, "Don't worry. You are still very beautiful." She lowered her head and moved her lips. He nodded and said, "Okay." She said, "Next life." She closed her eyes. The first time they met, he was so gentle. The last time they met, he was still like this. Whether there was a next life or not, it didn't matter. On the city wall, the sun was setting. The old woman was called Chai Dongdi. The old man was called Su Fengnian. Chapter 1667. Bailiang Province's Lingzhou was worthy of being called the Jiangnan beyond the Great Wall. Other than being rich, it also had a rare scholarly atmosphere in the northwest. Therefore, in the past few years, Lingzhou was a bit arrogant when facing Liangyu and Yuzhou. The military strength of the garrison was far from being as valiant as Liangyu province, but we have a lot of scholars here. It was a pity that after a young scholar called Chen Wang appeared in Yuzhou, the scholars in Lingzhou became a bit sickly. Even though Sun Yin could be considered a scholar who had walked out of Lingzhou 2 days ago and his highest position was the right chancellor of the Imperial College in the capital, compared to Chen Xiaobao who was in the center, he was clearly a great distance away. However, this kind of dispute could not affect a small place like Huangsha Province's Huanghua County. Huanghua County was a lower county and was located at the westernmost part of Lingzhou. Huanghua County was famous for being poor. Because it was in Lingzhou, Huanghua County appeared even poorer. Every time the county magistrate of Huanghua County went to the provincial capital and met a colleague of similar rank, it would be a torment. However, even though this place was poor, compared to Yuzhou, which did not like books and swords and spears, Huanghua County had dozens of villages of various sizes. Other than the government's voluntary school, almost every village had a private school. The wealthier villages and families even had ancestral schools. Therefore, the sound of children studying here was no less than other places in Lingzhou. Li Xian was the most knowledgeable scholar in the Li family village. He was an old man who had been to Liang's capital. However, it was said that he had failed the examination. He had traveled thousands of miles and returned thousands of miles. Logically speaking, if he had passed the examination, it would not be difficult for him to get a job in Huangsha province's government. Unfortunately, the scholars from the Central Plains had flooded into Lingzhou and someone had taken his position as a lecturer. Li Xian was originally from a poor family and could not make any connections. It was unknown whether it was because he was angry or not, but he simply returned to his village and opened a private school. There were 7 or 8 children from his village who were studying there and could barely make ends meet. It was impossible for him to save money to buy books. Moreover, Li Xian took the initiative to recruit a few children who did not have a surname to enter the private school. Not only did he have to pay for books, but he also took care of their meals and drinks. As a result, many girls of the age in the nearby villages who originally admired Li Xian backed off under the pressure of their parents. Today, Li Xian carried a small pot of wine to the neighboring village. There were no official roads between the villages, only a small sandy path that was about 10 feet wide. When the villagers and women met Li Xian, they would respectfully greet him as Mr. Li. Li Xian would also respond with a smile and chat for a while. Li Xian arrived in front of a hut by a stream and surrounded by a fence. An old hen and a group of chicks were looking for food, pecking and pecking. When Li Xian pushed open the wooden door, he saw a familiar figure walking in the distance. He smiled knowingly and stood at the door, waiting. The old man walked slowly with a hunched back, but he was hale and hearty. In his hand, besides carrying a pot of yellow wine sealed in mud, there were also some food wrapped in oil paper. The old man was the same as Li Xian, a teacher at the village's private school. However, compared to Li Xian, he had been teaching for more than 20 years. The old people in the surrounding villages all said that this guy surnamed Lu was an outsider whose ancestral home was from the Central Plains. His ancestors were very noble. When he first came here, he was very extravagant and was very imposing at that time. However, after so many years, no matter how rich his family's wealth was, it was likely that he had spent it all. Or perhaps he was really old and could not straighten his back. Compared to the villagers, Li Xian knew more. There was no doubt that Mr. Lu was a remnant of the spring and autumn period. When Li Xian was traveling north, he passed by Biyao. He should have continued north and followed the aristocratic families from the Central Plains into the southern dynasties of Beimang. However, when Mr. Lu reached Biyao, his family was in a mess. Some died of illness, some went missing, and some went crazy. In the end, it seemed that Mr. Lu was the only one left. He survived muddle-headedly. Li Xian did not know the truth, and Mr. Lu was not willing to talk about such trivial matters. In short, he took root in Biyao and set up a private school. Due to his eccentric temperament, rigid and harsh personality, coupled with his strange nagging, the private school had always been deserted. If it were not for the fact that he knew some strange medical skills that even the local doctors could not understand, this old man would have starved to death long ago. As for the person who brought the wine to visit the two of them, he was also an unknown teacher in Yellow Flower County. Li Xian's enlightenment of 300,000 was taught by this old man. The first time Li Xian kowtowed in his life was to the memorial tablet of Sage Zhang of the Confucian school and the old man who was a teacher. Now that he thought about it, this teacher's knowledge was neither high nor deep. He definitely could not compare to Mr. Lu who hid his knowledge well. However, to Li Xian, who was already an official, a teacher was a teacher. He would not add a surname like how he addressed Mr. Lu in front of him. The villagers did not have as much respect for this poor private school teacher as Li Xian, who believed in teacher for a day, father for life. They liked to call him Old Baldy Wang. Incidentally, when some naughty children were working in the neighboring fields, or when the teacher borrowed money from their parents, they also dared to laugh and call him Old Baldy Wang. As for whether they would be beaten later on, that was another matter. The children in the village were all thick-skinned and could run around the mountain barefoot. So what if they were beaten a few times? Li Xian's enlightened teacher, Wang Changqing, was not on good terms with Mr. Lu. The two old men were about the same age but had been through a lot. They quarreled from their middle age to their twilight years. Generally speaking, Mr. Lu's words were vague and vague. It would take a few years for people to realize what he had said. His words were not vicious at the moment. Wang Changqing's village slang was always eloquent. It was not very literary, but its lethality was not something that Mr. Lu could match. However, Mr. Lu was always calm and in an invincible position. Their quarrel often became like a chicken talking to a duck, or playing the lute to a cow. They never got tired of it. It had been more than 20 years. This time, Li Xian took out money from his savings to buy a pot of green ant wine because his teacher had just been taken over by someone else and had lost his job as a private school teacher. In a fit of anger, he was bedridden. The new teacher was even younger than Li Xian, who was nearing 30 years old. Li Xian had seen him once before. He spoke well and was a foreign scholar. Unlike the majority of scholars who went to northern Liang to enter Yamen, this scholar did not seem to like being an official. He was only interested in teaching. As for why he came to northern Liang to teach, only God knew. However, there were also rumors that this scholar had fallen in love with a young lady in the village at first sight at the Yellow Flower County Market. Therefore, he came all the way to the village to stay. Li Xian was a person who did not pay attention to the outside world when he was studying and was now teaching. He was not willing to investigate this matter. He felt that if it was true, then they could be considered a scholar and a beauty. Of course, he was willing to give his blessings to the lovers in his heart. From the corner of his eyes, Li Xian had already seen the teacher who wanted to go out and bask in the sun. When he saw the two figures, he immediately retreated into the house. His legs were very nimble. He probably went back to his bed and pretended to be sick. Li Xian and Mr. Lu walked into the slightly dark room together. The latter slammed the rice wine and food on the small table and said angrily, "There's wine and meat today. Old Baldy Wang, if you can get up, then you and I can eat and drink until we're clean. If you don't get up, then I'll help you eat and drink in front of you." Wang Changqing, who was lying on the bed, snorted coldly, "Rice wine." Mr. Lu said angrily, "If it's not rice wine, then is it Bailiang's green ant wine? If you want me to drink green ant wine, then the sun will rise from the west. Drink it or not." Li Xian could only act as a peacemaker and said with a smile, "Teacher, I brought a pot of green ant wine. Mr. Lu has soy sauce meat. How about it?" Only then did Wang Changqing slowly get out of bed. After getting up, he straightened his clothes. Mr. Lu sneered, "A monkey wearing a hat." Wang Changqing slanted his eyes and said, "Look at the clothes I'm wearing. It's brand new. This year, I'll even buy a new set of clothes. Look at the clothes you're wearing that year after year. You're completely disgraced." Mr. Lu calmly said, "To be noble when there is nothing to do, to be rich when there is no need to sleep early, to be rich when there is no need to walk slowly as a carriage, to eat late as meat, to wear ragged clothes as a fur coat, this is to live in peace and happiness." Wang Changqing rolled his eyes and said, "If you're poor, then you're poor. Do you have a reason for it?" Chapter 1668. Mr. Lu sneered, "Unlike some frogs at the bottom of a well, I have traveled thousands of miles in my life and have seen the heavens in human affairs. I have also read thousands of books in my life and have seen the heavens in human affairs. In this poor and remote Bailiang, I often see old scholars obsessing over old piles of paper for decades. Once they step out of the door, they lose their sense of direction. How laughable, how laughable. Especially those old piles of paper. If placed in the Central Plains where farming and reading are passed down, even a normal child would be able to recite them backwards." Wang Changqing was too lazy to pay attention to Mr. Lu. He sat down on a small stool and took the open pot of green ant wine from Li Xian. He lowered his head and sniffed hard. With an intoxicated expression, he said, "Just this smell alone is worth 7 or 8 taels of silver." Using the light from the broken window, Wang Changqing and his student, Li Xian, drank the green ant wine while Mr. Lu drank the yellow wine alone. Wang Changqing, with his sparse hair, stepped on the stool. Compared to Mr. Lu, who sat upright and still, he did not look like a teacher. On the other hand, Li Xian, who was taught by Wang Chongqing, did not lose to Mr. Lu in terms of elegance. Wang Chongqing poured 2 bowls of wine. Li Xian smiled and shook his head. Wang Chongqing pointed at his proud student and said regretfully, "If you don't drink, how can you write a good poem that will be passed down through the ages?" Mr. Lu said sarcastically, "Wang Chongqing, you have drunk at least a few 100 pounds of wine in your life. Have you ever written a good poem? Although Li Xian can be considered half a student of yours, he is a true Juren. In my opinion, it is only because of his status in Biyao that he could not pass the Jinshe examination. Is he someone you, Wang Chongqing, can teach?" Wang Chongqing drank a mouthful of green ant wine and wiped his mouth. He retorted, "I can't teach. You, Lu Shumai, can teach. Just because your family background is better, you can memorize a few more books. What's so great about that?" Mr. Lu wanted to say something but stopped. In the end, he did not say something. He only said angrily, "Unreasonable." Wang Chongqing drank another mouthful of wine and then burped. He picked up a piece of meat with 2 fingers and threw it into his mouth. Instantly, his whole body felt comfortable. Li Xian could not resist his teacher's persuasion to drink. After drinking half a bowl, his face turned red. The 2 old men drank and ate meat in silence, but one used his hands while the other used chopsticks. It was rare for Mr. Lu to get drunk. He was a little embarrassed, but also a little proud. His absent-minded eyes were filled with nostalgia. He muttered to himself, "I wish I could marry 10 women, I wish I could be a Dechu." Old Baldy Wang used his elbow to lightly poke the slightly tipsy student and asked in a low voice, "What's so special about 10 girls?" Li Xian smiled and said, "In the spring and autumn period of the past, there were 10 great clans. It's probably from a classic story." Old Baldy Wang was amused. "Didn't our great general teach him a lesson?" Wang Chongqing's voice wasn't small. Mr. Lu immediately glared at him. Wang Chongqing drank more than half of the green ant wine and was already 70 to 80% drunk. He stretched his neck and said, "What? You're not convinced? Don't think that you can look down on Biyao just because you're a remnant of the spring and autumn period. Do you really think that you're better than others? Humph, I've tolerated you for many years. In the past, you always said that His Royal Highness was a hedonistic son of a rich family. At that time, I was also blind to think that His Royal Highness wasn't as good as the great general and might not be able to shoulder the burden of Biyao. That's why I followed you and scolded you. Today, if you continue to be sarcastic with me, I'll teach you a lesson. Even if I can't teach you a lesson, there's still Li Xian, my student." Mr. Lu's eyes were bloodshot. He said softly, "You think you're amazing just because you can kill people? How can there be such a logic in this world? The history books recorded that a general's success is built on thousands of dead bodies? That's not the logic of a scholar." Wang Chongqing suddenly slammed his wine bowl heavily. A small portion of the green ant wine spilled out of the large white bowl. Wang Baldi, who usually went to the market to drink a bowl of wine, could drink until there wasn't a drop left. This time, he didn't care about his heartache. He said angrily to Mr. Lu, "The great general killed people like scything flax. I don't know if it's reasonable for him to let your central plains sink or not. I only know that from the great general to the Prince of New Liang, 2 generations of the Su family led the soldiers outside the Northwest Pass and blocked the 1 million strong cavalry of Beimang for your central plains. Taking a step back, even if the great general owes your remnant of the spring and autumn period, the Prince of New Liang and the Biyao Frontier Army will repay this debt on behalf of the Su family this year. Zhao Shunzi from our village, Li Xian's Li Erwa from Li Xian's village, and 2 young men from your Lu Mao's village. 4 people outside the Biyao Pass, but only 1 survived. 1 died in Huda City, and the other 2 died at the mouth of the gourd. Zhao Shunzi was in his early 20s. He was the same as me, Wang Chongqing. In your eyes, he was someone who wouldn't be able to achieve anything even if he studied for his entire life. But in the end, I, Wang Changqing, and you, this old bastard, Lu Mao, are leisurely drinking wine here. Wang Changqing slammed his fist on the table. The two of us who deserved to die didn't die. The ones who didn't deserve to die are dead. What are you after? Yes, Zhao Shunzi and the others didn't die for you, Lu Mao, nor did they die for me, Baldy Wang. But can't we remember their kindness? Can't you, Lu Mao, remember the kindness of the 300,000 soldiers of Biyao? Mr. Lu raised his head and drank a mouthful of wine. His expression was calm, but his lips were livid. He slowly said, "What's so difficult about remembering the kindness of those who died at the border? But why should I remember the kindness of the Su family? The Lu family of Dechu had more than 300 people. After Hong Jia fled to the north, only I, Lu Mao, was left. You were right about one thing. Those who deserved to die didn't die, but those who didn't deserve to die are all dead." Wang Changqing roared, "Get out of here. Lu Mao, I don't care how many of your people died back then." Mr. Lu suddenly stood up, smashed the jar of yellow wine, and strode away. Li Xian hesitated and then ran out after him. Mr. Lu's step staggered. Li Xian wanted to support him but was waved away. Li Xian's voice was raspy as he said, "Mr. Lu, other than the elders of this village, perhaps no one knows that my teacher's 2 sons died in battle early on outside Liangzhou Pass. Teacher's wife also died because of this." Lu Mao stopped by the stream. Li Xian gazed at the little stream. "When I went to Jing for the exam, my teacher gave me all of his savings. He said that Mr. Lu liked a set of Words of the Window LV song, and told me to bring a set back for you from Great Peace City. But at the time, among the people who went to Jing with us, one of them wanted to stay in Jing to participate in the exam. I impulsively gave all of my money to him in hopes that he would not be troubled by life in that capital that was hostile to Biyao and would be able to focus on his studies. I didn't even dare to confess this matter to my teacher because when I was leaving, my teacher told me that no matter what, Mr. Lu was truly knowledgeable. You were a true scholar that he could not compare to, but you were able to teach in Biyao for 20 years. Therefore, Biyao owed Mr. Lu. Therefore, he, Wang Changqing, should do something." Li Xian said softly, "Mr. Lu carries the hatred of the country and family. My teacher never dares to have you forget anything." Li Xian looked around. But Biyao, the poor and remote place in Mr. Lu's eyes, never forgets kindness. Never betrays justice. Li Xian smiled. "I've never met the great general, nor have I met the new Prince Liang, but I've met my teacher, Wang Changqing. I've met Li Erwa, who went into the river with me in the early years to catch fish. I've met Zhao Shunzi, who scolded me as a bookworm when I was young and beat me up. I've also met my teacher's 2 sons, and I've met my teacher's wife. Then I think, since we were born in Biyao, it's only right that we die in Biyao. For the people of Biyao who have to face the Beimang Iron Cavalry head-on, as long as the war at the border doesn't stop, it's normal for people to die every day and every year. Perhaps one day, we'll really be the ones to die. We'll still be unwilling, but we'll still be afraid. Death is one thing. Because Beimang can't let us Biyao live an ignoble existence. And we don't want to live an ignoble existence either. Mr. Lu, you said that in the early years of the Central Plains, people hated not being able to marry 10 women and hated not being able to be Dechu. Today, Liang hates not being able to be born in Jiangnan and hates not being able to live in Taiyan." Li Xian smiled carefreely. "As for me, Li Xian, I'm just a weak scholar. I only hate not being able to die in Liangzhou." The old man from West Chu stared blankly at the back of the young Biyao scholar as he left. The old man suddenly lay down beside the stream, stuck his head into the water, and drank fiercely. Then, he sat down cross-legged and laughed. "Good wine." The old man turned his head to look at the young man who ran back quickly. He must have thought that Lu Mao had taken things too hard. The old man couldn't stop laughing. On the contrary, Lu Mao had finally thought things through today. Compared to the Central Plains, whether it was the Central Plains of the spring and autumn period or the Central Plains of Liang, there weren't many scholars in Biyao, and there were even fewer books. However, who said that there was no chivalry between the lines here? Chapter 1669. A group of people walked along the city entrance road to the northern wall of the new city. Among them was the northern Liang administrator, Li Gongda. This was the leader of the civil officials in Lingzhou who lived like a prince. In the past, he was known as the #1 official in the northern Liang path. After becoming the new city's governor, he did almost everything by himself. As a result, he lost close to 10 kilograms. Although he was tired, he was full of energy like a withered tree in spring. His spirit was not inferior to the young people. In the past 6 months, Li Gongda had hardly worn his official robes. It was not that the administrator did not care about the style of a border official at all, but that this miser was really distressed about the money spent on changing his official robes. Later, he simply showed up in civilian clothes. It was said that he had changed more than a dozen pairs of boots, and they gradually changed from flashy to cheap and good boots that were as sturdy as possible. Today, Li Gongda wore the official uniform of grade 2 embroidered with a golden pheasant's patch. He and Yuan Zhuozong, the commander of Beiliang's cavalry army, who had the highest rank among the generals, walked on the left and right sides of the young feudal lord. Besides these two important officials of Beiliang who led the civil and military officials, there was a huge lineup. Except for Chu Lushan, the governor of Beiliang, who had to keep an eye on the border movement north of Huda City, and Yan Wenluan and Chen Yinshui, the two old generals of infantry, who didn't show up because of the many things waiting to be done at Calabash City, the other two deputy generals of cavalry, He Zhonghu and Zhou Kong, the deputy general of infantry, Gu Dazu, Tian Peifang, the governor of Liangzhou province, Shi Fu, the new governor of Liangzhou province, Hu Kuei, the governor of Yuzhou province, and Huangfu Qiu, the governor of Longxiang army, Li Mofen, the Longxiang army's representative, Chen Shiliang, and Ko Jianghuai, the Liuzhou cavalry army's general, Yu Luandao, the Yuzhou army's chief general, Hong Xinjia, and the real power general, Chao Xiaojiao, who had won the nickname of Quick Knife in the Battle of Calabash City, led 4,000 cavalrymen to join hands with Yu Luandao and completely blocked the retreat route of Yang Yuanzhan's personal army. What's more, it was Chao Xiaojiao, the governor of Beimang. At the top of the city wall, there was a veritable horse-riding path. The northern outer battlements had been completed, and the inner parapet wall was also about to be completed. The next step was to build the gate tower on the northern city gate. Su Fengnian stood at a battlements and looked towards the north. From here to the Liuya Fuling defense line in Huaiyang Pass, it was a flat terrain that was convenient for cavalry to gallop. He Zhonghu's left cavalry army and Zhou Kang's right cavalry army were stationed there. In the original plan of Su Shao and Li Shan, once Beimang captured Huda City, the two main cavalry forces outside Beiliang Pass would suffer the heaviest losses. However, due to the heavy casualties in the two battlefields of the first battle between Liangmang and Qingsang City in Liuzhou province and Heluku in Yuzhou province, Beimang could not gain a firm foothold. As a result, the two cavalry forces of over 70,000 didn't suffer any casualties for the first time. This was also the real reason why Beiliang was confident in the second battle between Beiliang and Beimang. Su Fengnian was multitasking. While listening to Li Gongda's detailed description of the progress of the new city, Su Fengnian was thinking about the next deployment of the cavalry. Back then, in order to defend Liuzhou and gain strategic depth for Beiliang, Su Shao expanded the Longxiang army from 10,000 to 30,000 without affecting the military strength of the army as much as possible. It was impossible for the border cavalry to have an extra 20,000 people out of thin air. Naturally, he would transfer the elites from the left and right cavalry, which would inevitably weaken the military strength of the border cavalry. However, the problem was that the 30,000 Longxiang army was almost wiped out outside Qingsang City. Of course, Liuzhou could not be abandoned. In fact, it would become even more important in the future when Yuzhou would be free of war. What could he do? The martial arts grandmaster Su Fengnian could use his will as a sword, but a land immortal was not a true immortal who could scatter beams and turn them into soldiers. He could only continue to ask for people from He Zhonghu and Zhou Kong. Not only did the Longxiang army need people, Ko Jianghuai, the general of Liuzhou who had made a great contribution, also wanted to form his own troops. Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry needed to be replenished no matter what. As a result, not to mention Zhou Kong, who had a fiery temper, even he Jianghu, who was extremely easy to talk to and was willing to consider the big picture, privately found him, the king of Biyao. What he meant was that the left cavalry could be given people, but he only hoped that the left cavalry would not be broken. Chao Wei asking for 2,000 people was fine, but Ko Jianghuai and Li Mofen, the two big shots of Liuzhou army, were really asking for an exorbitant price. One wanted 8,000, the other wanted 15,000. And it had to be elite old soldiers. At that time, he Zhonghu bitterly smiled and mocked himself to Su Fengnian. Even if all of his old bones were torn apart, it would not be enough to satisfy the two generals. As for Zhou Kong, who was also the deputy commander of the cavalry, he was even more stubborn. He did not even want to meet Ko Jianghuai and Li Mofen. He directly said that he only wanted his life, and that the right cavalry should not even think about taking a single soldier away. On this matter, in all of Biyao, there were only 3 people who could speak. Chu Lushan of the Governor-General Manor, Su Weisheng of Wutongan, and Su Fengnian. As for the others, even the old General Yan Wenluan of the spring and autumn period, as the commander of the infantry, would definitely not get involved in the military affairs of the cavalry, especially such a sensitive large-scale change. As the founder of the world situation theory, although great ancestor Gu was in the infantry, it was good that he did not have a deep foundation. He could give some advice. However, in the turmoil of whether to fight or to defend, after the fall of Huda city, he became hostile with the pro-war faction of the entire border army. He even had a falling out with Zhou Kong. They were only short of fighting. Yuan Zhuozong, whether it was the identity of the Su family or the position and prestige in the Biyao army, was one of the few people who could speak. Unfortunately, Yuan Zhuozong kept silent about this matter. On the surface, it was because he was busy organizing the 10,000 Snow Dragon cavalry and the 2 heavy cavalry. However, Su Fengnian knew that Yuan Zhuozong was worried about Chu Lushan, who remained silent after the war. Even if Su Weisheng wanted to speak, Su Fengnian did not want her to speak. Biyao was not the same as Liang. There was no pleasure in deciding the life and death of others. It was just a burden. As long as there was a man in the Su family, it would not be Su Weisheng's turn to carry the burden. Su Fengnian looked into the distance. In Jianghu, he had experienced many life and death battles. Many of them could be said to have escaped death. However, after the battle, he rarely had any lingering fear. As for the battle with Tuoba Bodhisattva, he even felt that it was not enough. As for the battle with Qi Jiajia and the imperial astronomer of Great Peace City, it was like turning over an old account. However, in this battle with Liang Mang, for the first time, Su Fengnian truly felt as if he had survived a calamity. This was because Huang Manor had almost died outside Qingsang City. If not for Deputy General Wang Lingbao, Huang Manor really would have died. This time, as soon as Huang Manor heard that his older brother was coming to the new city, he led the cavalry under his command back to Liuzhou that very night. Most likely, he was afraid that Su Fengnian would scold him, or perhaps he felt some unknown guilt. Huang Manor did not dare to return to Qingliang Mountain in Liangzhou. His second sister, Su Weisheng, was there. For Su Longxiang, the weight of his second sister's angry words was greater than the weight of Tuoba Bodhisattva's all-out attack. The sun set in the west, and the sun set on the long river. The border was no longer filled with smoke. However, half a year later, or perhaps even less, smoke would rise from all sides. In Beiliang's next battle, even if there would not be a large-scale battle, compared to before, Lingzhou's western Shu, which was further south, would have an additional unpredictable king of Shu, Chen Jibao. As long as Beimang still treated the western front as a breakthrough point, then Beiliang's dangerous situation would not be alleviated at all. They could only continue to exchange lives for lives. It all depended on whether Biyao could exchange one life for many lives. How many lives could they exchange for Beimang barbarians? Su Fengnian gently exhaled. Without turning around, he said in a low voice, "Zhou Kong." Jean Partridge took a step forward and cupped his fists. "This general is here." Su Fengnian calmly said, including the 2,000 cavalry of Great Sui camp, transfer 8,000 men from the right cavalry to Yu Wandao's Yuzhou cavalry. The old general Zhou Kong did not speak. Su Fengnian did not force this deputy commander to express his opinion. At that moment, the atmosphere on the city wall was heavy. Zhou Kong finally gritted his teeth and said, "Yes, sir." Su Fengnian turned around and said to Yu Wandao, "Transfer all the Yuzhou border cavalry to Liangzhou Pass and be in charge of defending the Koer pasture. You have half a year at most." Yu Wandao said in a low voice, "Yes, sir." Next, Su Fengnian quickly gave out military orders. Jianghu, other than the 2,000 cavalry given to Chao Wei, the 10,000 cavalry of Taipei camp will be given to the Longxiang army of Liuzhou. Yuan Zuozong will no longer lead the Jibei camp and will be given to General Ko of Liuzhou. Shifu, you are allowed to transfer 5,000 cavalry and 10,000 infantry from Beiliang to the north to defend the horseback slope. Hong Yu will be promoted to the main general of the Rouge army. Chao Xiaojiao will be the deputy general of Yuzhou. Yuzhou General Huangfu Xiu will be in charge of the Helan Mountain on the east. Chen Shiliang has been promoted to Flo State and is in charge of recruiting 6,000 strong youths from Flo State to join the army. 3,000 will stay in Azure Sky City and 3,000 will enter Ling State. These 6,000 youths and their families can obtain the Northern Liang Army. Voices of acknowledgement gradually sounded from the top of the city wall. Finally, Su Fengnian turned around and looked at the faces. The old Zhonghu Zhou Kong, the young Yuan Zuozong Shifu, and the young Yu Wandao Chao Xiaojiao. The 3 generations of generals of Beiliang. Su Fengnian said slowly, "Everyone, in the next 3 years, even if you die in battle, you must die before the new city is built." On the city wall, there were no heroic words or impassioned speeches. There was silence. Everyone just cupped their fists at the same time. Chapter 1670. Outside the northern Liang Pass, a majestic city had been built from the ground. Further south, this new city, which had just been officially named Refusing the North, also had the atmosphere of a skyscraper rising from the ground. A small market appeared. Although it was small, it had all the essentials. There were restaurants, tea houses, inns, pawn shops, and gambling dens. There were merchants and peddlers who came here to look for business. There were scholars who traveled to the border. There were Jianghu people who came here to visit with their friends. There were people who told stories here. There was a lot of discussion about the name of the new city. The foreigners all felt that the name Beijua City was not strong enough. It was not as straightforward as the name Beijua City. The scholars of the academy who had not been appointed as officials in Beiliang generally thought that Beijua City was more appropriate. Although it had a strong evil spirit, they had been in the northwest for more than a year. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. They began to be influenced by the customs of the Liangren people. Like water entering a sandpit, it was no longer a hidden spring in the forest, but a turbid wine. Beijua City, which was built at the beginning of the second year of Xiangfu, was the most important city in Beiliang, both strategically and symbolically. There were rumors that not only would the Protectorate General move into the new city from Huaiyang Pass at the end of the year, but a new Liangzhou prince would also build an official office here and become the provincial governor of the Outer Pass, who had both military and political power in Liangzhou. However, despite the importance of Beijua City, the elite border troops stationed around the new city were still in the pattern of Northern Yan and Southern Song. This could be seen from the fact that there were no patrols in the market. At first, the scholars who went to Beiliang were puzzled. They only understood after the local merchants explained that there were fierce battles outside the pass and peace inside the pass. Beiliang had been peaceful for more than 20 years. When it was close to noon and the sun was high in the sky, Su Fengnian walked alone in the market nicknamed Ziak Town. There were no white horses or guards around him. Even Su Yanbing did not accompany him. Most of the people in the market were foreigners. Other than the people of Liangzhou and the old people like Yan Wenluan, there were not many people who were familiar with the new prince of Beiliang. The tens of thousands of soldiers in Huda's city were familiar with him. Unfortunately, they had all died in battle, including their general Lu Jinu. They were also familiar with Su Fengnian's soldiers. However, more than half of them had died in the Second Battle of Huluku. Other than Yul Wandao, no one else would appear here. At this time, Su Fengnian's face was a little pale. This was the after-effect of the battle at the Imperial Astronomer. Qi Jiajie's sword Qi had been suppressed in 3 acupoints after Xianyuan Qingfeng had transferred it to Su Fengnian. This was also the premise that Su Fengnian was able to fight with Dong Tai and Chao Chongqing at the Xiamawi courier station. Now, the sword Qi was flowing freely in his body like a flood breaking through a dam. It was as if an army was passing through, or a cavalry galloping on the ground. Su Fengnian's sword Qi seemed to be thundering inside his body. If it were a Taoist saint who was good at inner vision, he would have completely given up on the idea of immortality. Su Fengnian picked a restaurant that was bustling with people and sat down. Out of the 3 times he had been in Jianghu, he had lived a life of haggling over every ounce. He knew that a single copper coin could not kill a hero, and he was used to having money in the palm of his hand. Weighing his money pouch, Su Fengnian ordered a pot of wine, 2 bowls of rice, and 3 dishes. He sat by the window, took off his cold saber, and put on his casual clothes. He looked like an ordinary scholar who had traveled to the border. The restaurant was not big, but business was good. As more and more diners poured in, there were people who had the intention of sharing a table. The waiter ran over to Su Fengnian with a troubled expression. Su Fengnian smiled and nodded, saying that it was fine. However, he had requested for 2 pots of green ant wine and that he would have to pay the price of 1 pot. The waiter thought about it and felt that this business was still profitable, so he acted on his own initiative and agreed on behalf of the restaurant owner. There were 5 people sharing a table with Su Fengnian, 1 woman and 4 men. The 4 men had completely different auras. It was unknown how they got together, but it was obvious that they were heroic and scholarly. For example, there was a tall man in his 30s. The scabbard of his sword was made of gold. As for the scholarly man, not only did he have a scholarly aura, but he also had a red sandalwood folding fan sprinkled with gold. The fan pendant was made of the rare redwood that could not be bought with money. However, Su Fengnian's eyes were shrewd and ruthless. One of the redwood pendants was made of honey, while the other one was made of low-grade iron. Thus, the difference in status between the 2 was obvious. It was obvious that the latter was just putting on an act. 1 table and 4 long benches. 2 heroic guests and 2 scholarly men sat side by side on Su Fengnian's left and right. Only the young and elegant woman sat alone across from Su Fengnian. Clothes make the man, and Buddha makes the gold. Probably they did not take the plainly dressed Su Fengnian seriously, so they talked without restraint. The woman had a Jiangnan accent, soft and gentle. She did not speak much, but she did not agree with the men. The 2 chivalrous men had a Jizhou accent and a Liaodong accent, while the scholars came from Qingzhou in the Central Plains and Jianzhou in the southeast. These 4 men talked about the world situation as well as Jianghu anecdotes. In their words, they had mixed feelings about the Liang imperial court. They felt that the officials of the various government offices in the capital were a new atmosphere for the new dynasty. It was a pity that Lu Xingxiang and the other generals of the southern expedition failed to live up to expectations, which allowed the Guangling rebels to take advantage of the situation and grow stronger. However, without exception, they did not have any doubts about the entire Liang dynasty's prosperity. First of all, Bailiang had defeated Beimang, and the northwest gate was as stable as a rock. Second of all, Gu Jintang's 2 Liao border armies had finally taken the initiative to attack and won a series of inspiring victories. Before this, the 2 vassal kings surnamed Zhao, the prince of Yanqi, Zhao Yi, and the prince of Guangling, who liked to compete with the Bailiang cavalry, had greatly disappointed the people. Fortunately, the great pillar state Gu Jiantang had stepped forward at this time, allowing the people to feel relieved. It turned out that in Liang, other than the Bailiang border army, there was no one who could compete with the Beimang barbarians. When it came to the 2 Liao and the assistant minister of the Ministry of War, Su Gong, who patrolled the borders for the emperor, the scholar from the Central Plains, casually, said that his father's generation had a close relationship with assistant minister Su. They had been schoolmates in the early years, and later on, they had become colleagues. When General Long Xiang entered the capital to take up his post, his father's generation had been in the procession to send him off. Even now, they were still exchanging letters. Hearing this, the woman who had been glancing at Su Fengnian from time to time suddenly became high and mighty again. Su Fengnian ate slowly and carefully, but there were only 2 bowls of rice and 3 dishes. No matter how slow he ate, he would eventually finish. Fortunately, there was still a pot of green ant wine by his side. He put down his chopsticks and opened the pot to pour himself a cup of wine. In reality, it was not just his table that was talking loudly. Most of the people in the restaurant were talking about the state affairs and eating the dishes and wine that cost 2 or 3 taels of silver. They were talking about the hearts of the imperial palace of Great Peace City or the Wangfu of Mount Qingliang in Biyao. Su Fengnian smiled as he listened to the hubbub around him. He raised his wine cup and turned his head to look at the bright sunny sky outside the window. At some point, the scholar from Jianghu, who was holding the carved Mithraea fan, had mentioned the new King Liang, who he had never met before. Perhaps he was drunk, or perhaps he was deliberately trying to surprise the woman he liked, but his words were a bit harsh. After drinking a cup, he sneered, "Everyone knows that the eldest son of the old King Liang was a bastard in his early years. His Royal Highness was a bastard. He was a bastard for more than 10 years and was infamous. The first time he showed his face was when the old King Liang let him participate in the martial arts parade outside Biyao. Clearly, this was to pave the way for the hereditary title of King of Biyao. Now, the people of Biyao all say that when the new King Liang was the crown prince and the general of Lingzhou, he taught the general of Huaihua, Zhong Hongwu, a harsh lesson. It was very satisfying. Is this really the case? The beautiful woman asked curiously, Master Song, what do you mean? Chapter 1671. The young scholar sneered, it's just a show of strength to warn the tiger and burning the bridge after crossing the river. In the end, wasn't it because the old Liang king was afraid that his son would not be able to convince the masses, so he secretly instructed Li Gongda, who was in charge of the Lingzhou officialdom, to deal with Zhong Hongwu as an example? Otherwise, with Su Fengnian's status and reputation at that time, would he dare to provoke the Biyao cavalry commander who had accumulated great power? Who didn't know that great General Zhong Hongwu had countless students in the border army? Not only that, even the wealthy Lingzhou of Biyao was jokingly called the backyard of the Zhong family. Biyao first forced Zhong Hongwu to leave the border army, and then took down this old military head. At the same time, during the military restructuring of Biyao, they did not touch the border army, but only the troops stationed in the territory. Everything was done in one go. Who would believe that this was not the plan of the old Liang king when he was alive? The young man who claimed to have been friends with Assistant Minister Su smiled and nodded. It should be said that he killed the old tiger to warn the fierce tiger. Zhong Hongwu was not in his position, and he was like a tiger without teeth. The old Liang king used him as a sacrifice for his eldest son. Yan Wenluan, who was also a general of the Biyao border army and also the local emperor of Yuzhou, had the old Liang king made a move? Did His Royal Highness dare to make a move? In reality, before Su Fengnian inherited the throne, he did not go to Yuzhou at all. Why did he choose Lingzhou? Because compared to Yuzhou, where even the farts of the generals were effective, the civil officials here could compete with the generals. In addition, Li Gongda had obtained the position of administrator, so how could he not serve the Su family to the death? More accurately speaking, Brother Song's so-called 3 matters were done in one go. The true foreshadowing was Li Gongda, the administrator who was also the Lingzhou provincial governor at that time. If I were Zhong Hongwu, I would have long been wary. The 2 heroes could talk big when they talked about Jianghu and Wulin, but when they talked about the officialdom and the imperial court, they were stunned. However, it sounded very murderous. The 2 of them looked at each other and smiled. Wasn't the pen in the hands of a weak scholar also a knife in his hands? The scholar surnamed Song agreed deeply and continued to mock and ridicule, regardless of whether Su Fengnian's identity as a great grandmaster is real or not. Let's just say that the appearance of the tens of thousands of Yuzhou cavalrymen outside the calabash's mouth is now said by the Biyao people that this action has something to do with Su Shao. But is there really someone in the world who is leading the charge on the battlefield? Even if there were, they would be brave and fierce generals who could fight against 10,000 people. As a vassal king, was this really appropriate? Did he not know that if he died outside the pass, there would be no need to defend Biyao? The old King Liang and his 300,000 cavalrymen defended the northwest gate for 20 years just to let Su Fengnian let his emotions affect his decisions and add a few good words to his name? At this point, the young scholar laughed loudly. Everyone in Biyao said that great General Su Shao was never afraid of being cursed by the world. They all said that Su Shao once said that the spittle of Li Yang's cursing could fill thousands of large vats, enough for him to wash his feet with for several lifetimes. Now it seems that perhaps it is true that Su Shao is not afraid of being cursed, but it is even more true that his son wants to leave his name in the history books, and it has to be a good one at that. The other young scholar skillfully opened his folding fan. The new King Liang, the new Biyao, the new Biyao, the great feat of rejecting the imperial edict won the hearts of countless Biyao people. Amazing. But I don't know if it was Su Beiji's idea or Chen Shiliang's plan. In my opinion, if not for Su Beiji and Lingzhou buying grain and Chen Shiliang strategizing in Qingsang City and Liuzhou, even if Biyao had a border army of 300,000 cavalrymen, they would not be able to stop the million-strong army of Beimang. Scholars were naturally close to other scholars. Of course, this was on the premise that there was no direct conflict of interest between scholars. Otherwise, scholars would harm scholars and kill without spilling blood. Su Fengnian slowly drank his wine. The meaning of the two young people was very clear. He was able to become king of Biyao today because of his father, Su Shao, and Li Yishan. He was able to guard the pass because of Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang. And he himself was wandering around Biyao, seeking fame and deceiving the hearts of the people. Su Fengnian was actually not angry at all. Instead, he was somewhat happy. In any case, these two foreign scholars admitted that the Su family had protected the Northwest for 2 generations. The hero with the golden scabbard sword lowered his voice and carefully said, "Two young masters, the walls have ears. I heard that the spies of Beiyao's Fu Shui chamber have top-notch ears." The scholar from Jianghu with the surname Song laughed and said, "It's fine. If they are captured, then so be it." It also proves that Su Fengnian's magnanimity is not enough to be the powerful king guarding the Northwest. Su Fengnian suddenly had a whole new level of respect for this person. There were many spies of the Fu Shui chamber in this small town, and all of them were experienced veterans. This guy's words seemed unrestrained and unrestrained, but it was actually equivalent to sticking a protective talisman on himself. If that Su Fengnian, who was fishing for fame, knew about this, he would laugh it off after hearing the news. He might even buy a horse with a lot of money to buy people's hearts and give the scholars an explanation. Su Fengnian sighed and lowered his head to drink his wine. Although the people at this table were very Jianghu, he suddenly remembered a young man who had just entered the Jianghu and died at the Lake of Spring. His name was He Zhu, and he had a grudge against the Su family of Biyao. However, in order to repay Jia Jiejia's kindness, he still went to the Quicksnow Mountain villa with serious injuries to report to Su Fengnian. In the end, he died at the villa. A promise worth 1,000 gold didn't care about life and death. Su Fengnian respected this kind of person very much. In his heart, this kind of person was only second to old Huang and the old man in the sheepskin fur coat. He was even above the peach blossom sword god Dong Tai. It was not about who you were, but what you did. It's not about what you've done, it's about putting yourself in my shoes. As long as you do something that I can't do, then I, Su Fengnian, will sincerely admire you. If we can sit at the same table, what's wrong with pouring wine for you? During his second tour of Jianghu, there was a retainer of a swordsman named Lu Qiantang. Before his death, he cursed Su Fengnian, F***ck His Royal Highness. His meaning was very simple. If you weren't the heir of Biyao, if you weren't the son of Su Shao, if the Tide Listening Pavilion didn't want the secret manual, would I have risked my life for you? Therefore, when Su Fengnian scattered Lu Qiantang's ashes on the Guangling River, he still felt guilty. Therefore, Su Fengnian always felt that the heroine, who was ashamed to spar with others because of her ample bosom, who was willing to show kindness to him and Wenhua when they were in dire straits, was a true heroine. Li Chuangong's Jianghu was very large, a lifetime large. Therefore, he came to the great snowy plateau for the sake of green Pao, and to the broken armor by the Guangling River for the sake of the peerless swordsman in green, so that the two of them would have no regrets. Before his death, he borrowed the sword from 10,000 li away to personally deny the saying, "If the heavens didn't give birth to me, Li Chungang, the way of the sword would be like a long night for all eternity." Old Huang's Jianghu was very small. He died on the city wall of Wu Wu for his master, Sui Xiagu, who loved to eat swords. He wanted to prove to his master that he had a pretty good disciple. More importantly, it was for the young man whom he was willing to address as young master, the young man who had walked through Jianghu with him, the old man who had wandered 6,000 li with him, the old man who lacked front teeth and carried a sword case on his back. He didn't regard Su Fengnian as his royal highness, but rather as his own junior. When Wen Hua folded his sword and left Jianghu, he must have regarded Su Fengnian as Su Fengnian, as a scoundrel friend who called him brother and roamed Jianghu with him. Because of these Jianghu people in Jianghu, Su Fengnian lent his saber to the young child who longed for Jianghu at the Tumbling Horse Pass, killed people in Beimang in anger for Qing Zhu and Yang, and did not have any hatred for the devilish couple, Duckhead Green. Therefore, when these people gradually left Jianghu, Su Fengnian became one of the 4 grandmasters of Wushu evaluation, and on the contrary, he did not care about Jianghu anymore. Su Fengnian had always had good intentions toward this world, toward this Jianghu. Just like the sun outside the building, when it was peaceful, everyone thought that it was the main culprit of the scorching summer. However, when winter came, the sun would not stop coming just because people hated it during summer. Instead, it still made people feel warm. Chapter 1672. Su Fengnian finished the last cup of wine and gently put down the wine cup. Because they were sharing a table, as the wine and meat were continuously served, his plates and bowls were all squeezed together. He looked pitiful, like a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. It was as if they were afraid that this eyesore would covet his beauty and shamelessly ask the waiter for an extra jug of wine. So when Su Fengnian put down the wine cup, the 4 men all cast impolite glances at him. Su Fengnian smiled and was about to tactfully pay the bill and leave. This was because Su Beiji, who had somehow found his way here, was actually standing behind the woman. He had previously refused Su Fengnian's signal to sit down and had already stood there for 2 cups of wine. Every time he heard the 2 scholars mocking and ridiculing Su Fengnian, he couldn't help but laugh at his misfortune. Su Fengnian actually felt very guilty towards this young strategist that he had personally abducted from Beimang to Beiliang. The conflict between Su Beiji and Qin Shiliang had been foreshadowed when his master, Li Shan, was still alive. As for the carving of these 2 pieces of unpolished jade, Li Shan had also taught Su Fengnian a brocade pouch and given his own unique views. Su Beiji is like a woman from a wealthy family. Even if she has a mediocre appearance, she naturally has the bearing of a great family. She needs to be carefully carved from the fine details and get rid of the negative arrogance. Only then can one slowly see the heavenly fragrance and national beauty and gradually enter the best state. Qin Shiliang is just like a beauty from a poor family. Although she is extremely beautiful and moving, in the end, she still lacks the natural bearing of a rich family. She needs to be given an aura from the big picture and open up the layout. Only then can she be as round as you wish, charming but not bewitching. As a result, over the years, Su Fengnian had tried to bring Qin Shiliang by his side. First, he let him take charge of the salt and iron industry in Beiliang. Later, he even let Qin Shiliang be in charge of the local military and political restructuring in Beiliang. Instead, he threw Su Beiji far away from Mount Qingliang and slowly climbed up in the officialdom in Lingzhou. It was only when the great battle of Liangmang was imminent that he had no choice but to hastily take down Zhong Hongwu that Su Beiji was promoted rapidly. Now, the 2 of them just happened to be reversed. Qin Shiliang was far away in Liuzhou in the western regions, while Su Beiji was in the prince's mansion in Mount Qingliang. It had to be said that fate made fools of people. On the surface, Su Beiji had been the provincial governor of Lingzhou and was a practical border official. Now, he was qualified to be the transport commissioner of Beiliang. Although it was a little empty, he was like the provincial governor of Liang entering the capital to take up the position of minister of the 6 ministries. If he could go through another provincial governor and return to the central government, then he was basically set to be the first assistant and second assistant. On the other hand, Chen Shiliang, in the 3 matters of salt, iron, transportation, military, and politics, he had failed in 2 and succeeded in 1. His official position was neither high nor low. In Qingsang City in Liuzhou, he had only reached the position of first assistant. Even Su Beiji's position as the provincial governor of Lingzhou was lower than Su Beiji's. However, in reality, the generals in Beiliang who had benefited from the restructuring, such as Wang Ji, Huang Xiaokuai, and Zhao Wui, more or less owed a debt to Chen Shiliang, the person behind the scenes. Especially in the Battle of Qingsang City, he pushed Chen Shiliang to a transcendent position. The officials of Beiliang and scholars who went to Liang greatly respected Chen Shiliang's decision to renounce the brush and join the army. For the time being, a second-rank transport envoy who had not been recognized by the imperial court, a Liuzhou provincial governor who was supported by the public, a provincial governor who was hiding in Beiliang's backyard, a transport envoy who would continue to deal with taxes and provisions, and a central civil official of Liuzhou who had personally heard of Beimang's horseshoes and personally seen Beimang's iron armor. The difference between the two's future achievements would not be judged based on their official positions. In the depths of Su Fengnian's heart, Su Beiji, who was a great talent in the overall situation, was only hidden in Lingzhou because he needed to inherit the position and live a stable life. Otherwise, Su Beiji would have been in Yuzhou or Liuzhou to oversee the overall situation. Yang Guangdou or Hukuei's provincial governor positions, one of them should have been given to Su Beiji. Unfortunately, the second battle of Liangmang was about to begin. Su Fengnian still needed Su Beiji to be far away from the battlefield and win a stable rear for the Beiliang frontier army. This kind of smokeless battlefield was destined to be invisible to the common people. Even Beiliang's officialdom would overlook it. Naturally, it was far inferior to Chen Shiliang, who was on the front lines, who shone with extraordinary splendor and dazzling brilliance. When Su Fengnian stood up and called for a waiter, for some reason, Su Beiji walked up a few steps and patted the woman's shoulder with a smile. When she turned her head in shock, he asked, "May I ask for your name?" The 2 scholars who came from afar glared at this lecture. The heroic hero from Liaodong suddenly stood up and pressed down on the sword at his waist. He said in a low voice, "Brat, I advise you to remove your dog's paw from Miss Lu's shoulder." The 4 of them saw the young man angrily withdraw his hand. However, he immediately raised his hands and clapped heavily. Very quickly, a Beiliang warrior in iron armor strode into the restaurant. The hall was instantly silent. As for this general, one could tell at a glance that he was no ordinary soldier. It would be an understatement to guess that he was a commandant of the border army. Su Beiji was like a hedonistic son of a rich family. His dog's paw was placed on the woman's shoulder again. His other hand pointed behind him and smiled. "What, you don't like it?" The burly general full of killing intent stood behind Su Beiji. Although his aura was shocking, his eyes were filled with helplessness. Motherf *Ker, I am a military officer with real power in Lingzhou. How did I become a henchman who helped my young master bully people? The key was that this was in front of the king of Beiliang. Su Fengnian, who was taking out money to pay the bill, felt a headache. The waiter quickly took the money and ran away. The hero of Liaodong immediately let go of the hilt of his sword. Although he did not say anything about lowering his head, it was clear that he wanted to keep the peace. Su Beiji suddenly turned to look at the hero of Jizhou. He took 2 steps forward and slapped the guy's head. He cursed, "From your accent, you're from Jizhou? Jizhou, right? I almost went to your Jizhou to be the administrator. *CK your Jizhou." According to Su Beiji, the Beiliang cavalry would really have to borrow food from Jizhou and Hezhou. Moreover, they would have to advance all the way to the west of the capital. Su Fengnian was a thick-skinned grandmaster. Su Beiji could not vent his anger. Today, he finally had a chance to do so. The hero of Jizhou wanted to cry but had no tears. "The person who provoked you was not me. I was busy cleaning up the greasy chicken leg. I wanted to flatter Miss Lu, but I missed it. I didn't even have time to glare at you. What right do you have to be angry at me? Other than the Lingzhou lieutenant, there were quickly 7 or 8 armored soldiers who heard the news. As a result, Su Beiji's bullying became even more obvious. Su Fengnian stood up and walked around the table. He held Su Beiji's hand and quietly said, "Let's go." Su Beiji forcefully swatted away Su Fengnian's hand. He angrily said, "Go, go, go. You only know how to retreat. When will you show even a sliver of your courage toward Beimang? The Liang Imperial Court will not dare to let Wen Tai and Ma Zhongxian go to Jianghu province to take over the transportation. I, Su Beiji, was in Lingzhou and was called the governor of Bomi. Now I'm in Qingliang province. I've become a transport officer in the mountains and a grain purchasing official. This doesn't matter, but our Beiliang cavalry does." Su Beiji, who had accumulated a lot of resentment, was finally furious. He punched Su Fengnian in the chest. "If Liang wants fewer people to die in the world, I, Beiliang, agree. But if Liang wants more people to die in Beiliang, Su Beiji will be the first to disagree." Wen Tai, Ma Zhongxian, and I, Su Beiji, were mentioned one after another. It was not just the 2 scholars who had just mocked Beiliang about the transportation. They were so scared that they kept quiet out of fear. The entire restaurant did not dare to breathe loudly. Su Fengnian wanted to say something but stopped. Su Beiji suddenly looked like a disheartened old man in his twilight years. He was dispirited and said self-deprecatingly, "I know that in the end, you were able to let the imperial court enter Beiliang without a lack of provisions. You, the king of Beiliang, have actually done very well." Su Beiji looked at the young vassal king. "But, I feel that it's not worth it for you." Su Beiji suddenly turned his head and roared at the 5 people, "Do you think that Beiliang is a fool? That the names on those stone tablets are all fools? Just for this bastard called Su Fengnian, you are so generous to die in battle outside the pass?" Su Beiji, who did not drink but looked like he was drunk, looked around. "If I, your father, Su Fengnian, was a sullen bastard, would have killed you guys who can't even be considered bastards. South of the pass is my Beiliang. Don't forget, south of Beiliang is your central plains." Su Fengnian shook his head and said to Zhu Zi, "I'm not sullen." Su Beiji looked at this guy in a daze and said bitterly in a low voice, "I'm sullen." Su Fengnian smiled and picked up an unopened pot of wine from the table. He put his arm around Su Beiji's shoulder and said, "Okay, I'll treat you to a drink." Su Fengnian did not say anything and left with Su Beiji. He did not forget to turn around and look at the waiter who was holding the copper coins that should be given to Su Fengnian but did not dare to come forward. He joked, "Charge this table less for a pot of wine, and we're even." Chapter 1673. The officer with real power following behind Su Beiji as a retainer was precisely the son of Beiliang's old general Wang Shizu, Wang Ji. After the Battle of Sword Gate, he was in charge of the border between Lingzhou and Western Shu at Malang Ridge and Laziku. Now, he was one of the 14 officers with real power in Beiliang. Hong Shuwen, who stood out in the Phoenix Battalion, was now serving under Wang Ji. It was enough to see Wang Ji's position in the young king's heart. Some of the voices could be heard in Fu Shui room, so could Su Fengnian. If one wanted to become a leader in Beiliang, then one had to be pushed to the position of the head of the army. At the very least, one had to be connected to the border army and military power. Otherwise, even if one reached a high position like Li Gongda, one still wouldn't have enough power to speak in Beiliang. Before Su Fengnian took over as king, did Li Gongda dare to stare at Zhong Hongwu? He didn't dare. Even Zhong Hongwu's subordinates didn't dare. Meanwhile, in Beiliang's leaders, apart from Yan Wenluan, He Zhonghu, and Shen Yinshui, the others like Huang Fuchang and Hu Kuei counted because they had military power in their hands. However, Liangzhou provincial governor Tian Peifong, whose official rank was half a level higher, could not. The current Chen Shiliang could also count because he had the advantage of being close to the Longxiang army. During the Battle of Qingsang City, he also had a life-and-death relationship with Liuzhou General Ko Jianghuai. However, Su Beiji could not. As he left Lingzhou and entered the king's manor, Wang Ji, who had a good relationship with Su Beiji, and this group of young and strong generals, would have some thoughts. That was why when Beiliang's big shots met at Beifang City and Wang Ji left Laziku North, apart from Wang Ji wanting to advocate for Su Beiji, wasn't Lingzhou General Han Laozhan secretly inciting him? Wasn't this the first time the entire Lingzhou military system, which had high hopes for Su Beiji, spoke up? Su Beiji was like this. In reality, almost all of the border army generals were like this. Why was Left Cavalry Commander Zhou Kong so adamantly against splitting his troops? Was Jean Partridge really greedy for power? Naturally, it wasn't that simple. Zhou had to consider their interests. As long as he, as the deputy cavalry commander, wanted to advance in the border army, he had to give the people behind him some assurance. However, Su was too strong. Su Fan's power was too strong. Su caught him by surprise in front of them, and he had had no choice but to lower his head. He had had no choice but to, he needed to consider their interests. Their interests, Jean. As needed, he had, he was. And he. Therefore, when they got off the city wall, He Zhong, who was also split from the right cavalry, suddenly called Zhou Kong to drink with him. Su Fengnian took these actions to heart. As long as Jean Partridge didn't do anything too extreme, it was fine. There was no reason to strip him of his military power and not allow him to complain. The number one person in the Beiliang border army, Chu Lushan, stayed in the Huayang Pass Governor-General manor. He didn't show his face from start to finish. Wasn't it because even he, Chu Lushan, wanted to do something but couldn't? Rather than making a futile effort and making people hate him, he might as well just shut himself in. Li Yang's previous emperor, Zhao Dun, killed Zhang Julu. Then one day, if he really defeated Bei Mang, would Su Fengnian have to make a choice between Su Beiji, Chen Shiliang, and some other general situation? Similarly, would Su Beiji and Chen Shiliang also have to make a choice between the king of Beiliang and some ideals and dreams? Maybe not, maybe he would. This, perhaps, was already enough to make people feel uneasy and uncomfortable. The commoners who ate steamed buns and the nobles who ate cauldrons had different degrees of pain and contentment. However, the weight of pain and contentment was never different. The celestial couple who lived freely in Jianghu, the gifted scholar and beautiful woman in a small place, and the poor and remote people who grew old together. Perhaps their love had different degrees of grandeur and gentleness, but their feelings for each other were actually not that different. Su Fengnian and Su Beiji walked up the outer wall of the market that wasn't very high. Wang Ji tactfully didn't follow them. Su Fengnian squatted on the short wall and ate the roasted naan that he had just bought from the stall. He bought 2 naans, but Su Beiji didn't appreciate it. He stacked the 2 naans together and ate them. Su Beiji sat cross-legged and clenched his fists on his thighs. He was in a daze. Su Fengnian asked in a muffled voice, "Zhu Zi, why are you so angry all of a sudden? Other than me, who else has offended you?" Su Beiji said slowly, "This world has offended me, and you're such a coward. Of course I'm unhappy." Su Fengnian ate the naan until his cheeks were bulging. He turned his head and smiled. "Actually, I'm not happy either. Perhaps I'm too thick-skinned. You can't tell." Su Beiji didn't turn his head. "If one day Beiliang defeats Bei Mang and takes over the world, I won't go to the Central Plains. I'll go back to Bei Mang." Su Fengnian gasped in surprise. "That's a pity. Let me tell you, in the past, in order to trick me into going to Jiangnan, Big Sister always said that the land there was good, and that the streets were filled with delicious girls. I didn't believe her at the time. Later on, I went to take a look myself. It was true. If it weren't for the fact that Beiliang has a girl from Yanji County to support us, I really wouldn't want to leave the Central Plains. Even if you don't want to be an official, you should still go and take a look." Su Beiji raised his head to look at the sun. He squinted his eyes and said, I'm not going. In this lifetime, I'll walk from the north to the south. Lingzhou in Biyao is already south enough. Su Fengnian leaned his shoulder against Su Beiji. Zhu Zi, you don't like any girls in Lingzhou? If you do, but the girls don't agree, I'll help you snatch them. Su Beiji turned his head to look at this unruly young prince. He said seriously, if you become the emperor, don't let Chen Shiliang be the grand secretary. It'll be good for both of you. Su Fengnian was stunned. He smiled and said, don't worry, I won't be the emperor. Su Beiji said again, then don't let Chen Shiliang be the second Zhang in Liyang. Su Fengnian patted his chest and said, if I really beat Bei Mang, I won't have any worries. It won't be as difficult as you think to decide who dies and who doesn't. Su Beiji shook his head and said, Zhang Julu wants to die. Su Fengnian fell into deep thought. Su Beiji sighed and said, Chen Shiliang isn't suitable for the central government of the imperial court. He can only be a provincial governor. At most, he can be an administrator far away from the capital. Only then will he be able to enjoy his old age and have the time to play with his grandchildren. Su Fengnian nodded. If there's a chance in the future, I'll pass on your words. But as for what Chen Shiliang thinks, I won't stop him. I don't think I can stop him. Su Beiji stretched out his hand. Su Fengnian was puzzled. What? Su Beiji glared at him and said, Nan. Su Fengnian tore off half of the remaining naan and handed it to Su Beiji. Su Beiji finished the naan in big mouthfuls and wiped his mouth. Persimmon, if I'm unhappy, I can still vent my anger on you. But if you're unhappy, what should I do? Su Fengnian said without hesitation, beat Bei Mang barbarians. Su Beiji, who was sitting on the ground, closed his eyes and patted his knees with his hands. Su Fengnian followed the beat and whistled. One persimmon, one tangerine. Following Persimmon's light whistle, Tangerine suddenly said in a clear voice, You can only see 10,000 carps jumping through the Dragon's Gate at Tide Listening Lake. Persimmon laughed and said, You can only see Mount Qingliang, the famous stone steels not counting. You can only see a bottle gourd's mouth building a view of the capital. You can only see the skeletons of the dead under the high walls. You can only see the north of Liangzhou riding horses in the west wind. You can only see the south of the border, the sound of Lang Lang's books breaking out of the hut. You can only see 300,000 cavalrymen dominating the world. You can only see the Beiliang people wearing mourning clothes. Many years later, the Beiliang Palace on Mount Qingliang had long become the residence of the Beiliang Taoist administrator. In the middle of the night, a white-haired old man stood alone in the snowy night with a walking stick and looked at the end of the street. The old man with the surname Chen, who was known as the #1 border official of the new Liang dynasty, had been guarding the house behind him that used to be surnamed Su for 40 years. A full 40 years. Because of this, he had rejected the invitation of the new emperor of Liang at the end of last autumn and refused to become the new grand secretary of the new dynasty. Therefore, he had rejected the posthumous title of Wenzheng. Everyone in the Liang court knew that this poor scholar from Jiangnan, who had risen in the northern Liang officialdom and never left the northern Liang, had the lofty ambition of dying as a civil official before entering the northern Liang. He had just resigned from his position yesterday. Now, the old man's hair was the same color as the wind and snow. Just when the old man, whose vision was blurry, thought that no one would come, a carriage arrived leisurely. The old man walked down the stairs shakily. Another white-haired old man walked down from the carriage. The old man who had come from afar was clearly not as strong as the old man surnamed Shen in the large house. The old man surnamed Su wore a thick fur coat and needed the help of the coachman, who also had the surname Su, to walk up to Sir Chen. The three of them walked up the stairs together and turned to look at the snowy street. Separated by the most inexperienced person in the middle, Chen Shiliang, the Beiliang Taoist administrator who had held the post for more than 30 years and was unwilling to move, leaned forward slightly and turned to look at the other old man. He laughed softly and hoarsely. I helped the prince guard Beiliang Road and this Mount Qingliang for 40 years, so you're not as good as me. Isn't that right, Su Beiji? The doddering old man in the thick fur coat snorted coldly with all his strength. You win, okay? The old man in the middle, although of similar age, looked to be in his early 40s. He held the hands of Chen Shiliang and Su Beiji on both sides and laughed softly. Don't fight. The emperor of Liang had changed and the title of the dynasty had changed. But the three old men, Su Fengnian, Su Beiji, and Chen Shiliang. Only tonight, they had seen the heavy snow of Biyao. Chapter 1674. Originally, in the early autumn of the second year of the Liang auspicious talisman, the civil and military officials of the Chu imperial court wished they could divide the world. But in a short 3 months, there was an atmosphere of mourning. If it was not for Grand Preceptor Sun Shiji being neither sad nor happy, and Chao Zhangqing showing no signs of taking over military power from Xia Shibian, the court would have been in chaos. But to Empress Jiangxi, who sat on the dragon chair and wore dragon robes, there was no difference whether she was looking at a group of glowing officials or a group of frowning officials. She even had some mockery that no one knew about. Earlier, De Chu had defeated the strong on the Guangling River and wiped out vassal King Zhao Yi's Guangling navy. Later on, they had successfully ambushed the Nanjiang army's important supply base. At the time, the most clamorous discussion was something like, a country cannot do without a ruler cannot do without an empress. The current empress of De Chu, although a woman, still needed an empress to conform to etiquette, right? Therefore, Song Maolin, who was known as De Chu's twin jade annulus along with Xia Shibian, and the eldest grandson of the Song household who was known as the Northern Su and Southern Song, along with the Prince of New Liang, had the most support. Perhaps it was because Song Maolin was so outstanding that even Grand Tutor Sun Shiji hinted to Chao Changqing, who was far away from the court, that he might as well agree to this marriage. Not only was it beneficial to the stability of the Jiang family of De Chu, but the young empress could also not be considered lowly. But as the number 1 general of Nanjiang, Wu Zhongshuan, parted ways with vassal King Zhao Yi and returned to Guangling with the dual identities of Liang Minister of War and Great General of the Southern Expedition, Lu Xingxiang finally revealed the fangs that a famous general should have. Song Li, who had also been to Great Peace City, snatched all the military power from Guangling King Zhao Yi's hands. Especially with Chen Jibao and the elites of the Shu lands entering the battlefield, De Chu's front lines shrank. From frequent reports of victory, they went into a passive defense. The enthusiasm in the court that seemed to be close to attacking Great Peace City was like a bucket of cold water poured over their heads. Most of the officials and nobles were like frosted eggplants. It was at this time that Chao Changqing, who had the intention of sharpening De Chu's young generals, finally withdrew from the Guangling River Navy and returned to De Chu's capital with the identity of Grand Marshal of De Chu as well as Minister of War. It had to be known that when Jiangxi ascended the throne as emperor, Chao Changqing was still the commander of De Chu's navy. His official position was even half a rank lower than the 3 old generals. He was only the same as the disciple of the Eastern Front's commander, Xia Shibian, who was only a secondary second rank. Without Chao Changqing overseeing Divine Phoenix City, the people were in a constant state of anxiety. With Chao Changqing's Divine Phoenix City, even if he did not bring a single soldier, the dark clouds above De Chu's capital immediately dispersed and the sun could be seen again. In reality, everyone was well aware that without Jiangxi, the new De Chu would not be able to restore the country. However, without Chao Changqing's previous running around everywhere, perhaps it would be a lamentable situation where they would not have the strength nor the will to restore the country. After the morning court was dismissed, Chao Changqing, who did not have the time to participate in the morning court, went to the imperial palace to report. He changed into a brand new set of court robes and was led by a eunuch from the ceremony directorate. He quietly waited outside the imperial study for an audience with His Majesty, following the etiquette of a ruler and his subject. The old eunuch from the ceremony directorate was apprehensive. If it was in the past, His Majesty, who had already known that Chao Changqing had arrived at the capital, let alone receiving him in the imperial study, he would have welcomed him outside the capital. This meant that His Majesty and the Minister of War, whom he had always respected as his own elder, had most likely developed a knot in their hearts. This was definitely not a good thing for the country. The expressionless Chao Changqing waited at the foot of the steps. He smiled bitterly in his heart. Of course, he knew why His Majesty had left him hanging outside. His Majesty was angry, very angry. At the time, the old Grand Preceptor had strongly recommended Song Maolin, and he had neither agreed nor refused. How could she not be angry? The fact that he did not use the great Liang Dragon Sparrow sword to attack Chao Zhangqing was already giving face to his uncle. Chao Changqing didn't make a sound after the worried old eunuch bent down to close the door. He stood in place without making a sound. The imperial study in the Dechu Palace was very spacious. Although many of the precious items in the room had been stolen by Prince Guangling Zhao Yi, Dechu's foundation was very deep. In the early stages of the restoration of the country, the imperial study was no less than it had been in the past. Chao Changqing raised his head and saw the young woman wearing a yellow dragon robe. Her head was lowered as she practiced writing on the tribute Xian paper. She didn't use the imperial brush, Millennium Youth, which symbolized the continuity of the country. Chao Changqing moved his gaze slightly and saw the golden lacquer cup engraved with the words, Forever Gold O. According to the tradition, on the first day of the first month of each year, the Emperor of Dechu would open the window and use the Millennium Youth to dip into a cup filled with Tusu wine. He would write the auspicious words, World Peace and Long Live the Country, and present them to the civil and military officials. Before this, she had once expressed some apprehension to him, saying that her writing wasn't beautiful. She quietly suggested that he ask his uncle to write for him. Of course, Chao Changqing didn't agree. He only comforted her that she could write as little as possible. When the time came, she could only give it to old Grand Preceptor's son and a few people who knew her well. It wouldn't be embarrassing. Only then did she reluctantly agree. However, she still couldn't hide her unhappiness. Chao Changqing heard that after she ascended the throne, she had practiced a lot this autumn and winter in order to raise the brush on the first day of the new year. In any case, it was definitely 100 times more diligent than practicing the sword. It was said that she had already filled a small basket with paper. She didn't throw it away and just accumulated it over time. The palace maids and eunuchs weren't allowed to touch it. Chao Changqing looked behind the large table and at the slender, bright golden figure. His gaze was absent-minded. He seemed to remember a blurry scene from many years ago. Chao Zhangqing suddenly felt a little sad and guilty. The Empress Dechu, who no one called Jiangxi, didn't look at Chao Changqing in a fit of pique. She angrily said, I'm still angry. I need to write at least 30 more words to calm down. Uncle, just you wait. Chao Changqing didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He moved a chair over and sat by the window. The chair was tilted toward the window. He could see the scenery outside and, out of the corner of his eye, see the little girl who didn't look like an emperor even though she wore a dragon robe. However, even Chao Changqing couldn't imagine that Jiangxi would sit on the dragon throne every day in court and receive all the civil and military officials. Even Grand Tutor Sun Shiji nodded inwardly at the official's bow. Not only did she not lose her manners, even he, an old man who had stood in the courts of the two dynasties for close to 60 years, could not find any flaws even if he did not care about her identity as a woman. Her monarch and minister played together. At first, she was slightly reserved, but now she was adept and as she wished. She advanced 1,000 miles in a day. She was simply born to be an emperor. Sun Shiji privately joked with his friends that the emperor's sword realm was extremely fast. It was the same for the ruler of a country. She meticulously wrote a dozen words and snuck a glance at Chao Changqing, who was sitting upright and still. Jiangxi curled her lips. She probably realized that it wasn't appropriate for her to compete with uncle, so she gently put down her brush and coldly snorted. I'm done. Chao Changqing held back his laughter and quietly said, there are still 11 words. I'm not in a hurry. Jiangxi glared and said, Uncle. Chao Changqing smiled slightly and said, all right, I know that Song Maolin's matter has angered the emperor. I came to the capital this time to be the emperor's punching bag. After all, the old Grand Preceptor is old. The emperor can't lower himself to the same level as him. Jianghu put on a show of force and picked up the brush again. If I didn't want to be the emperor, I would have secretly beaten that Song guy into a pig's head. Qiao Chongqing couldn't help but laugh. Of all people to learn from, that king of Biyao pulled out Jean Lanting's beard in Great Peace City. It caused the assistant minister of the Ministry of Rights to wait half a month before he dared to go to the yamen for roll call. Jianghu placed the brush heavily on the brush holder. Qiao Chongqing hesitated for a moment and then sighed. Qingliang Mountain must have a consort for the king of Biyao after the great victory. In this matter, you can't blame him. Jianghu lightly slammed a fist on the table and glared angrily. Then she wrinkled her nose and coldly snorted. You're blaming me? Qiao Chongqing smiled and hurriedly waved his hands. I don't dare, I don't dare. Chapter 1675. He finally understood that Song Maolin was nothing. The king of Biyao was marrying a concubine, which was the main reason why the emperor of Dechu was angry. Therefore, he, Qiao Zhongqing, had actually been implicated by that brat surnamed Su. Qiao Chongqing smiled gently. When men and women were young, he liked her and she liked him. No one disliked the other. It was really good. Every man in the world had a wish to win the heart of his woman and never leave her. However, compared to seeing a beautiful woman with a white head, he was more afraid that a beautiful woman would not have a white head. Qiao Chongqing was somewhat dejected. For the first time, he doubted himself. Was he wrong? He had already missed it. Why did he make them miss it as well? Lu Songtao, who had converted to Buddhism, persuaded him with life and death. Du Qianxing of the Confucian school persuaded him with reason. Even the smoke of war rose from all over the Central Plains. None of them could persuade Qiao Chongqing to let go of Dechu. Jianghu asked carefully, Uncle Chessboard, are you angry? Qiao Chongqing gathered his thoughts and shook his head. He said softly, even if Uncle Chessboard is angry with the whole world, even if he is angry with Dechu, he will not be angry with your majesty. Jianghu sighed like an old man. Although saying this is somewhat unfair to my father and mother, I feel that if my mother could have met Uncle Chessboard earlier, Qiao Chongqing, who was known as the most outstanding man in the world, Dechu is most proud of, and green clothes come out early, Dechu will not die, blushed for the first time. He coughed a few times and quickly interrupted what Jianghu was about to say. He then pretended to be angry. Your Majesty. Jianghu smiled mischievously. My mother can't meet Uncle Chessboard earlier. Otherwise, there won't be me, Jiang and I. For some reason, she called herself Jiang and I and not Jianghu, who was destined to be recorded in history regardless of the success or failure of the restoration of the country. Qiao Chongqing's face darkened. He said angrily, Your Majesty, be careful. I purposely forgot something. Someone in Great Peace City asked me to bring these words to His Majesty. Jianghu hurriedly straightened his posture and said in all seriousness, Uncle, state affairs are more important. Please speak. Qiao Chongqing said with a straight face, Your Majesty, I'm a little thirsty. The Empress of West Chu stood up at an astonishing speed and ran to the door. She didn't care about losing Her Majesty as a monarch and personally opened the door and ordered, Bring a pot of Spring God Lake tribute tea for Minister Ling. Not long after, Qiao Chongqing calmly held the teacup in one hand and fanned the tea with the lid of the teacup with the other. Qiao Chongqing closed his eyes and smelled the refreshing fragrance, as if he had completely forgotten about that serious business. Qiao Chongqing didn't even need to open his eyes to know that the emperor was purposely keeping a straight face, but his ears were perked up. Qiao Chongqing's lips curled up. After taking a sip of tea, he said, Your Majesty, I lied to you. This lowly subject only fought once in Great Peace City and did not hear anything. Jianghu made a sound of acknowledgement and pretended not to care. Looking at the words on the paper on the table, he was filled with anger and killing intent. In fact, there were only 3 words on the densely packed xian paper. Qiao Chongqing suddenly asked, Your Majesty, I heard that someone has proposed 3 plans. The best plan is that the main force of the West Chu army should go down south. They would not hesitate to work with the Yan King Zhao Bing and work together with Liang. The middle plan is to expand to the west, and the worst plan is to fight to the death with Lu Xingxiang's army. Jiang Xi made a sound of acknowledgement absent-mindedly. Qiao Chongqing smiled coldly and said, a pedantic scholar's armchair strategist. Jiang Xi raised his head and looked at Qiao Chongqing. He asked softly, Uncle, when we went to Beimang together, other than the patriarch of the southern dynasty who was a remnant of the spring and autumn period, was the lecherous old man we met last the present commander of Beimang's eastern front, Wang Sui? Qiao Chongqing nodded. Jiang Xi hesitated for a long time and then asked in a low voice, then did Uncle secretly contact Gu Jiantang? Qiao Zhangqing was silent, but he smiled. The emperor of Dechu is not inferior to the new emperor of Liang, Zhao Zhuan. Jiang Xi lowered his head and bit his lips. The ambitious Yan King Zhao Bing is not a good person, but people like Wang Sui and Gu Jiantang are not much better. Qiao Chongqing stood and walked to the window. He said slowly, scholars rule the country, so Dechu had hundreds of years of prosperity and became the orthodox school of the Central Plains. But in troubled times, it is difficult for scholars to save the country. The scholars of the Great Chu, cannot understand this principle. I, Qiao Zhangqing, am also a scholar, so I cannot say it myself. Reason. But no matter what, I can do one thing, and that is to let the three emperors of Liang understand that without Su Shao, the scholars of the Zhao family will not be able to save the country. Qiao Chongqing lowered his voice. But the principle that I, Qiao Chongqing, want to tell the world is not this. After a long time, Qiao Chongqing turned around and looked at her. He smiled. In the early years, the spring and autumn were turbulent. There were countless bewitching prophecies and ballads that spread throughout the world. One of them was about your mother, the Empress of Dechu. So Uncle knows that you were willing to leave Beiliang because you were afraid. Jiang Xi turned her head away and said fiercely, no. The imperial study was silent. Jiang Xi suddenly realized that Uncle Chen was standing by the table. She quickly covered the pile of paper with her hands and said with a red face, don't look, don't look. Qiao Chongqing deliberately stretched his neck to see what was going on. He asked curiously, it doesn't look like the word bastard. Jiang Xi blurted out, of course not. Who would want to write that he is a bastard? I don't even want to scold him. Qiao Chongqing smiled and didn't say anything. The young empress in the dragon robe insisted on blocking Qiao Chongqing's line of sight. Qiao Chongqing smiled and asked, assassinate you? Uncle Chen is the only one in the imperial study. Your Majesty, this makes me feel like I am walking on thin ice. Jiang Xi bent over the paper on the table and raised her head. I saw wrong, I saw wrong. Uncle Chen, your eyesight is not good. Don't read under the light in the future. Qiao Chongqing covered the teacup and leaned forward. He rubbed his silly daughter's head with his free hand. Uncle Chen is old. Not only are my eyesight not good, my memory is also not good. Now I finally remember that sentence. That person said it in Great Peace City. The general meaning is that he will soon personally lead the Beiliang cavalry to Guangling Road to take you back. If you don't agree, then he will snatch you, stuff you into a sack, and carry you back. He, Su Fengnian, can't be bothered to care about Liang, West Chu, or whatever. She was dumbfounded and could only blink her eyes. Qiao Chongqing smiled and said, I am not lying to you this time. It is true, absolutely true. She still blinked her eyes. Qiao Chongqing seemed to murmur to himself and pretended to be angry. No matter how I look at it, since Dong Tai and I could not win against him in Great Peace City, then it is clear that we cannot stop him. I, Uncle Chen, am not an immortal. What can I do? What is the saying? When Jiang Xi smiled, she had two dimples. One could topple countries, the other could topple cities. She unconsciously smiled and replied, cucumber salad, that is delicious. Qiao Chongqing said softly, Shindi was a wise ruler, but not a good husband. I, Qiao Chongqing, am even worse. I am a coward who has become stupid from studying. But that young person in Biyao is better than us. Your Majesty, when the time comes, just give him a blow. Do not really stab him to death. You will regret it and be sad. Giving up hope seemed heavier than being sad, but in reality, it was not as relaxing as giving up hope. Jianghu wanted to cry. It was like hearing the last words of an elder. Xiao Chongqing gently put down the teacup. He put it down. In the war between the two countries, like Dechu and Liang, there were the armies of the West Wall. Now, Biyao and Bimang also had 300,000 cavalry against a million army. But one day not long after, Li Yang's auspicious talisman had been 3 years, and West Chu's Shen seal had been 2 years. At that time, Gu Jiantang stood alone in his tent. After a night of silence, he said to himself, Xiao Chongqing has ruined me for 20 years. On the border of Bimang, Wang Sui drank alone and laughed. Satisfying, satisfying. This is the true romantic of our infatuated generation. That day, outside Great Peace City, there was Xiao Chongqing in West Chu. One person attacking the city.